just on the council agenda sheet that we've got we're going to be approaching and addressing milestone 2, milestone 3, milestone 4, and milestone 5, all under the holistic economic development Laramie centric options. So it's really exciting when we as staff get to meet such a number of goals under one topic as quickly as we are out of the goal setting session that you guys just had in January. Tonight we've got Mike Scholl, Planning and Economic Development Professional for Ayers & Associates, and Christina Heigl, Senior Civil Environmental Engineer for Ayers & Associates. And they're going to give us a presentation and have discussion with us related to urban renewal authorities, tax increment financing. And with no further ado, I will turn it over to Mike for the presentation.
Thank you, Todd. I'll give just a quick introduction. Again, my name is Mike Scholl. I work for Ayers Associates. I've worked in redevelopment for almost going on 2 decades. I've done over $150 million worth of redevelopment, mainly for municipalities. I've only been in consulting for about 2.5 years. So most of my professional experience has been more in the working for municipalities, kind of helping helping to facilitate development projects and investment through urban renewal and through other kind of redevelopment entities. So it's a real pleasure, and I appreciate the opportunity to kind of share some of my knowledge with you. And if there's any questions, feel free to pause. I'd like to be very informal. If I'm going to cover it in a future slide, I'll let you know, and we can kind of go from there. But if you do have any questions, feel free to kind of pause. And if I go through something too quickly, please let me know, and I'll certainly kind of go over it again or answer any questions. So thank you again. And I'm here with Christina Heigl. She's my colleague from Ayers Associates, who is based out of Laramie. If you want to pull up the slide deck, and we can start. Thank you. You can go to the next slide. So I just real quick, this is more of a personal philosophy. I'd like to show this slide just because, I want to remind people, especially when you work for city government, you're in the forever business. When you're looking at doing redevelopment and development work, private developers are looking at things in 4-year, 7-year, 10-year investment thresholds. For communities, you're really looking at forever. I mean, what you do today, hopefully will create a legacy that will last forever and improve the community. So to the extent that you can kind of bring some quality and good investment, I think it's a good thing in the community. So you go ahead to the next slide. So I'm going to go through just some urban renewal, just some 101. I'll go through that quickly, and then talk about tax increment financing, kind of what it is, how it works in Wyoming, talk a little bit about some of the differences between urban renewal and DDA. They're kind of captured both in the same place in the Wyoming state statute, but there's a couple key nuances and differences I think that are important to understand going forward. And then I'll talk a little bit about some of the work that I did with assisting the city of Cheyenne, kind of both thinking strategically and helping them put together the project area and the development agreement, and that they're working on for the hitching post. And then I want to talk a little bit about, just go through a quick exercise and kind of how valuations are done, and when you're projecting tax increment going forward. And then there's a few lessons and suggestions I have based on my experience. So go ahead to the next slide. So urban renewal is it's a broad term. It goes back from it's really since kind of post-World War II. It was seen as kind of the slum clearance. It's changed, it's evolved over the years. In every state, it's a little bit different and named a little bit different. And, some it's tax increment finance, some it's TID districts. So, but it's all generally based on the same principle that you're able to kind of leverage future tax revenue to make investments today, to make projects happen, and really looking at projects where the economics don't necessarily work because you're dealing with challenging conditions. So if you go ahead to the next slide. So when I talk about kind of the the challenging conditions, it's really what I'm referring to is the conditions of blight. And when you say blight, it's really a politically loaded term, but it's really a legal term of art. A lot of times, when people hear that, they think, oh, you're designating my neighborhood or my block or something as blighted. And it really, if you think about kind of what it means legally, it really is a range. Everything from, if it's a non-functional use for kind of current conditions, that it's functionally obsolete, issues related to public health, impairs the ability to provide housing. These are very general, broad terms. These are from the state statute. Contributes to the spread of disease and crime, traffic, and big one too, especially for older buildings, environmental issues. You're dealing with asbestos and lead paint and things like that. So it's really a broad term, but it's one that it's important to understand when you're setting up an urban renewal authority and you have to designate areas and identify conditions of blight, because it can be a bit of a scary term. And being able to explain it and help people understand that really it's more just a legal term and not anything that is going to negatively affect your property value. In fact, generally the investment provides a benefit to surrounding areas, especially if you can remove areas that are blighted or in need of revitalization. So go ahead to the next slide. So in Wyoming, you've had urban renewal for quite a few years, but it's been fairly limited in use. There's 4 cities that had created urban renewal authorities, but they never unlocked the potential of tax increment. They never took that second step in kind of understanding the financing pieces of it, which I'll get into in a second. It's Casper, Evanston, Rock Springs, and Green River are the 4, and now Cheyenne created theirs most recently. They mainly have used it communities have used it for planning purposes. But I think in recent time, I think with Cheyenne and the mayor there really providing some leadership and wanting to get some of the projects done, I think he's really created this opportunity, I think, and I think there's a lot of communities that are interested, now that they've kind of started that process and are pioneering that a little bit. So go ahead to the next slide. So one of the key differences that I want to highlight for you and help you understand is the difference between the authority and the plan area or project area. The authority is really the body politic. It's the governing body that you create. You can create an authority that covers the entire city. You can cover an area that covers a discrete part of the city. Generally, I would recommend if you're going to create an authority, I would create it to cover the extent of the city boundaries. And it's really more akin to, say, like a planning commission. It's a body that's empowered under state statute to do certain things, but it's not in and of itself. Creating authority doesn't generate tax increment. You have to take the next step, and you have to identify a plan or project area. The term is used somewhat interchangeably in state statute. And the picture you're seeing in the bottom right, that's actually the area that was identified for the hitching post in Cheyenne. And I'll show a little bit more detail a little bit later, but you can have multiple project or plan areas within the urban renewal, and within the project plan area is where you collect the tax, where you create that opportunity to collect tax increments. So if you think about urban renewal is kind of the big area, it's the organizing body, the governing body, and then plan areas are the specific projects that you want to achieve within that. So you can have multiple plan or project areas that are collecting different tax increment on different schedules, depending on the needs of the project. So, it's something to keep in mind, when you're looking at urban renewal, because I think one of the things that I think occurred, and I think I'll get into this a little bit more in the tax increment discussion is, people created these really large urban renewal, in Cheyenne, they had a consultant that came in and proposed this really massive urban renewal area and along with a massive project area. And the problem it created, it wasn't clear what the outcomes that they were looking, the development projects within that area that weren't very clear. And then what happens is, if you're not careful, if you take a really big area, while you make an investment and that might go up and the value may increase, other properties around may go down, and it may dilute kind of the effect of the investment. So there's some strategic considerations for how you draft these project areas and what the kind of investment and the timeline of the investment that's going to occur within these defined areas. So, and you have to go through, when Cheyenne set up their urban renewal authority, they went through and they said, we've identified the conditions of blight to set up, to meet the legal standard, to set up the authority, and we're going to take the extra step, and we're going to tell you, to be fully transparent, that we're looking at a number of different project areas, and we're going to identify some conditions of blight within the forming documents for the authority. Including the hitching post, the Heinz building, there were a couple others, the Reed Avenue corridor. But when they went to actually set up the plan or project area, they had to go through another process, and I'll get into that in a little bit, where you identify conditions of blight and then go through and have the urban renewal approve that. So there's really two steps. It's part of the kind of the same process, but it's important to understand that distinction. And are there any questions? You can go ahead to the next slide as well, but I just want to pause for a second and make sure if there's any questions or. Okay, I will continue. We lost the PowerPoint. Thank you. So, in setting up an urban renewal authority, it has certain powers. It can make and execute contracts, disseminate information, complete public improvements, pursue grants and accept federal funding, acquire property. That's an important one to contemplate. And exercise the power of eminent domain. That one's a bit loaded. I know that comes up, but I've yet to see any urban renewal authority in my professional experience actually exercise that. You can dispose of property, borrow money and complete plans, and can do rezoning actually, but replatting. So it does have some broad authority to kind of make change and revitalize areas within the defined kind of urban renewal area. So if you go ahead to the next one. So I want to shift gears a little bit now and talk about tax increment financing and is a tool to finance and create opportunities for investment in areas that are struggling or that need some investment, some special attention. But before I do that, I'd like to just kind of provide some terminology so that we can kind of all be operating off from this kind of same set of facts. And when we talk about it, because I think a lot of these terms get used interchangeably, and I'd like to kind of ground it in a little bit before we go forward. So tax increment refers to the revenue increase over and above the base, and I'll get into what how it works in a little bit. But that's really the above the line revenue that occurs as a result of that investment. The base revenue is the revenue that when the project when you approve the project area plan area, you establish a base amount of revenue. It's the preceding 12 months and however much revenue to the different taxing entities is collected. That stays static going forward. So the taxing entities, they still receive that amount going forward into perpetuity, or depending on how you form the plan area. The tax increment revenue are the revenue, so the money that's diverted to the Urban Renewal Authority to do the projects, and those go to a special fund. So the city holds the special fund of the Urban Renewal Authority. So it's remitted to the city, and it's held in a special fund to be spent by the authority. And I should mention too, I don't think I discussed this in my slide, but there is a board, there's an appointment process that the city council has to go through and to appoint a board. It's a 5-member board, and it's and there's certain requirements and that you need to go through for the appointment and how they're appointed. But it is an appointed board, and there's some requirements around that as well. And then the tax increment financing is more the verb. It just means, how you're using that tax increment revenue to finance and to support some of these projects. So I just like to go through that real quick just to make sure the verbiage is kind of all there before we get into some of the deeper discussion. So if you go ahead to the next slide. So this is kind of a real simple graphic that explains how it works. So assuming the base revenue, the project area is approved right at the point where the blue and green meet on the left, and that base revenue is then remains static into perpetuity. And then all of the revenue that's collected over and above that the blue is remitted off to the urban renewal for use in financing these projects or supporting these projects. So it's fairly simple and straightforward. It can get a little complicated, but generally, you have you have a property that's collecting a certain amount of revenue. That revenue stays, is held harmless going forward, and then everything that occurs above it usually is hopefully as a result of an investment that you're making on the front end gets redirected to the special fund. Now, I will say this is from a strategy perspective and how you use it. It's important. What you want to do is make sure you have the base as low as possible and you have the upside as high as possible, which gives you the maximum amount of flexibility. And that's why I know there's a project I think you're looking at that is some publicly owned property where the base would be fairly low because it's non-taxable. So in situations like that, the base is really low and you get to collect potentially everything above it to support that reinvestment. So trying to think of, when you start to draft and define those project areas, making sure that you can kind of manage how big the base is so you're not affecting that upside potential of that revenue. So go ahead to the next slide. So this is just kind of an example. This is a part of some of the financial projections, one of the iterations for the hitching post. And a property, and if you look on property 2, that's the base. That was the property tax was collected within that area that was defined that I showed you in the earlier slide. It was about just over $5,000. You had a property that was a hotel that was burned down, some vacant land, and there wasn't much going on, but there were a few things, and they collected every year about $5,300 in property tax that was distributed to the different taxing entities.
Thanks, Brian.
And so looking ahead and when they completed the hotel, the hotel redevelopment, projecting the property tax was about $34,000, $35,000 a year. And so essentially, if you kind of hold the base going forward at the $5,300, and subtract that from the base, you end up with about $30,000 a year going forward that you can then apply back into the district and for public improvements and a range of things to help those projects go forward. So that's generally how it's calculated. And again, to the extent that you can keep the base as low as possible. I mean, the challenge with using urban renewal in Wyoming is that your tax basis is fairly low. So it's not and it's a good thing, but in this instance, it just limits the amount you'll be able to use. So to the extent that you can kind of be strategic and keep that base low and look at larger investments, the more money you'll get to you can bring to bear on some of these more challenging projects. So go ahead to the next slide. So real quick, just looking at kind of the key differences between urban renewal and downtown development authority. Under urban renewal, I talked about condemnation is allowed. That's always a little bit of a hot button, though. Like I said, I've not seen it used in any urban renewal. There is no time limit. I think that's an important consideration. Like I said before at the beginning, you're in the forever business, and even though the revenue that you could take, because the tax basis is lower, you could take it out over a longer threshold, which allows you maybe to do some things, be a little bit more creative to help some of these projects get going. And DDAs are time limited to 25 years. So there are, so you have to be careful because, once you've set one up, your clock starts ticking, and obviously time is an important component of, when you're looking at kind of opportunities to finance and fund some of these projects. There's no limitations in the area with urban renewal. Like I said, you can set it up as the entire city limits and then create different project areas. DDAs are limited to the central business district. Though with DDAs, you can use sales tax to some extent. I think under some restrictions, you can't, or there's not that opportunity necessarily in urban renewal. And also the similarity is you can use tax increment with the approval of the project area with either of them. But I think the challenge, with DDAs, you lose the opportunity of time. So that's just something to keep in mind. So I know you have a DDA already in existence in Laramie. So if you go ahead to the next slide. So this was just a quick case study. Like I said before, the city of Cheyenne had created the Urban Renewal Authority, went through a process of board appointments and forming and education. And then once, they got through that, they had been working with a developer who was looking for some assistance with some of the public improvements and utilities and streets to help support the investment. So they went ahead and created the hitching post, the urban renewal plan area, which is shown here. If you see the picture on the left, they're doing the demo. The project had burned down, and there was the building had asbestos. I'm sure most of you probably have seen it if you've ever driven into Cheyenne. It was a bit of a mess. You go ahead to the next slide. So they created this specific area for the purposes of collecting the tax increment. And they agreed, had a reimbursement for public improvements not to exceed 1.2 million. So essentially what they did is the city advanced some of the funding and then was able to capture that revenue back to pay for it. Now, one of the things that always comes up with urban renewal is evidence is, well, can you issue bonds? And the challenge, in theory, yes, you could issue bonds, but much like I always say, my 15-year-old thinks when he turns 16, he's going to go out and get a loan and buy a Ferrari when he turns 16, but he has no credit history. And so I think much like that, though I would hate to compare them to my 15-year-old, in the absence of any credit history, it's not the cost of issuing bonds, the amount you're going to be able to issue creates challenges that just really make it not feasible. However, you do have the opportunity to enter into contracts for purposes of financing. So, in some instances, if you can advance some capital funding to support these projects and then take the revenue back to refill those accounts over time, you can just do a straight bank loan. I've done that before in the past where, banks will lend the urban renewal. And the benefit is you have a line between the urban renewal and the city. So if the urban renewal takes a debt of say 1.2 million or 1.5 million to finance and fund, build public improvements, if for whatever reason they default, the city is protected, from that legal authority. So you have a separation there that I think is important that protects you with some of that risk. So there are different ways you can structure that, depending on what you're looking at and the needs of the project. So that's just something to keep in mind, when you start to look at the different projects, or areas where you're interested in promoting some redevelopment. I know there's one that was discussed kind of informally the opportunity to do kind of more of a mixed use, which I think you could generate fairly significant tax increment and help support some of the public improvements, sidewalk, streets, and different things like that. So, but I think that you definitely have some potential with a few projects in Laramie. If you go ahead to the next slide. So this is just a rendering of the project that's going to go in. It's a mixture of kind of a hotel with some conference, a fairly large restaurant to serve both kind of conference needs and the needs of the folks who stay there. And part of what we did, I assisted with the city is, help build a financial model so that they could kind of do an analysis of the tax increment potential going forward, which I'll get into next. But this was just, I thought it's important just to show kind of what was going in the area that after they cleaned it up. So go ahead to the next slide. So I'm going to walk you through kind of the evaluation. I'll go through this. Try to go through it quickly. I love spreadsheets, so it's kind of a fault of mine, so I apologize. I play around with them and I like to build them out, especially for redevelopment projects. And part of what I like to do from when we're working with communities is kind of build a financial model that you can continue to use for different projects. So put in the inputs, put in the data, and then get the information back to help you make informed decisions going forward. The benefit with doing urban renewal as it stands in Wyoming is it's only property tax. Property tax, generally speaking, is a little bit more predictable. I mean, there are ups and downs. I recognize that, but in areas like I've done a lot of work in Colorado, and they include sales tax, and sales tax can go up and down. You lose a restaurant, and it's a huge. So it can fluctuate a lot more, and it's a little bit harder to project. But in Wyoming, with being just property tax, I think it gives you a little bit easier. It's a little bit easier to project going forward. So this is just an example. The base we went through. These are the parcels that comprise that area, the project area, the valuation, the assessed value for purposes of the tax revenue, the property tax revenue. And you look back, it was approved in 2021, and then you do a look back of 12 months, and you establish kind of what that base is. Now, one of the things that's important is, obviously they're taxing entities that you work with, that you're friends with and collaborate with, the counties and different taxing entities, and working with them to understand that, the revenue is going to get redirected, but for kind of critical and important things. And so once you kind of create the project area and you can create the valuation, making sure you have those discussions with the county and the county assessor to understand that, okay, we're going to lock it in. We're both on the same page of what that tax revenue is, because, just to make sure you give yourself that certainty. And I will say, I'll say this kind of out loud. From a policy legal perspective, you don't need the permission of the other taxing entities. You can put in an urban renewal authority, but I recognize there are political. I've worked for city government. I recognize there are considerations. You work with county and the other entities all the time on various things, and you want to have good relations. So to the extent that you can kind of have, reach out and have those discussions, I think it's important. But anyway, the first step, establish the valuation for purposes of base. So if you go to the next slide. So the next slide is to capture the project profile. So what's going to go in? What is the investment? What's the square footage, the unit count? This doesn't include infrastructure cost at this point, because real estate is valued not on the cost of construction, by the stream of income. So even if you go in and you say, well, geez, we have to put in $5 million to put a water line or street, but the project's not worth that $5 million. Why don't you value it at that? Because really, at the end of the day, property, it's valued based on income. Real estate developers they're buying income. They're not necessarily buying properties in the way we think. People that aren't necessarily in the real estate development world. And that's when you go to the assessor is going to look at that stream of income to make an estimate of value, and then they're going to take that and they're going to compare it with other projects. So it's important to understand, look at these projects from a developer's perspective and say, okay, what is the income potential on the project as built moving forward? So if you're going to do a mixed-use project and you're going to build 100 units or 200 units of residential, how much are you going to rent them for? What's the, what's the potential income you get? You're going to have some commercial space, and what do you expect to rent it for? And what is that income when you back out expenses and stuff? And so within the spreadsheet, these calculations occur. So if you go ahead to the next slide. So once you're able to do that and you establish your net operating income, you divide that by your market capitalization rate. It's kind of a real estate term. It's a little counterintuitive. It's a point, in this instance, I did it by 15%, 0.15. The higher the cap rate, the riskier the project, the lower the cap rate, the less risky. But it's just a way of kind of imputing some value for the real estate. And it's generally how the assessors will do it. And then they'll take this and they'll compare it with other like projects to make sure that it's confirmed. So, once you can kind of understand the program, you can start to estimate what the value is going to be at completion and stabilization. And if you go to the next slide, then you can subtract that from the base and start to project out what the potential tax increment you're going to get back to the urban renewal is over time. So, and some of these, there are ways where we look at kind of a 3-year stabilization period. There's other little details and nuances. I won't get into it, but generally speaking, that's being able to kind of, it's important to be able to understand what that potential is to help you negotiate or have those discussions with private investors, developers, to understand what it is you could contribute to help things work and understand how it's going to kind of affect you as the urban renewal fiscally and the community fiscally. So if you go ahead to the next slide. So just real quick, in looking at projections and things that you should keep in mind, I try to use very conservative estimates. Assessors are conservative. They don't like to get challenged, and so they're going to be conservative too. And so sometimes, I mean, it's easy to go in and say, well, this, you're going to get $2,000 per unit rent per month, and you're going to generate massive amounts of tax increment. But and then make some commitments that you can't maintain. So I like to keep it very conservative, use a higher capitalization rate, do some discounting, and then work with the assessor to kind of understand and make sure that we're both on the same page with what the base is, and then understand that the analysis is not the same as the market transaction. So it's important to kind of to keep in mind some of these different lessons when you're looking at the what capacity you have to make these reinvestments. So if you go to the next slide. So these are just a couple suggestions, and I will say the one that starts small. I know that I should kind of rephrase that, because it doesn't necessarily mean small in size. What I mean is, think about being understanding discrete project areas that you can justify the redevelopment. Yeah, thank you. And so, you can do big projects within some of those areas, but make sure you're looking at very discrete redevelopment areas so that when you're having the conversations with the other taxing entities, you can justify the use of that revenue, and you're not, it's not seen as somehow you're doing a tax grab, but really it's important to kind of stimulate the growth in areas that are in need of it. And then, focus really on what drives that tax increment, which is private investment. Like I said before, I mean, when you have property, particularly public property, where you have a very low base, if you can get that private investment, then you get that upside on that chart I showed you with the increase in the property value. So it's really important. You want to stimulate private investment, Again, I talked about focus on discrete plan areas and projects that are predictable. You know, when you're looking at projections and if you need to obligate any debt, you want to make sure that your numbers can justify that. And be realistic about the revenue projections going forward. I mean, you're not going to, you know, it's tough to do really, really big projects just because, you know, your property taxes generally is lower. And so you're not, you know, you're just not generating that amount of revenue. So, but part of it is, you know, being able to look at it, understand, you know, what that vision is, what you want to occur, and what that project is going to generate in revenue. So that covers it for me. If you want to go ahead and I'm going to stop, and if there's any questions or comments, I'm here.
I'm sure there will be. And we're going to go in this order. We're going to go with the Vice Mayor, Councilor Schmeckel, and Councilmember Harrington. Vice Mayor Pierce.
Great, thanks. Mike, I'm wondering if the project areas or your discrete areas need to be contiguous.
That's a good question. They do have to be. You know, that's a good question. I'm not sure, but I think generally speaking, if they're not, you know, people generally kind of do like a flagpole annexation along a public right-of-way, like a street or sidewalk, to connect them. The one restriction I should say is you can't do one property. So you can't do one legal parcel. You have to have more than one. And that's outlined in the state statute. But I think I'd have to look. That's kind of a legal question, but if they have to be contiguous. I think the other thing you could do, quite honestly, is if you have two different areas, you can enter into contracts to share between the two as well. So there's different ways I think you could strategically address that.
Great. Great, thanks. And then if I can have a follow-up, my second question, not related to the first, can you explain a little bit more about the availability and maybe I missed it, is like, I understand that we don't have to partner with the county, for example, or other entities, but are they eligible? Is the county eligible for this as well? Or is it only municipalities, you know, first-class cities? I mean, who is eligible for this?
I'd have to, again, my recall memory for legal statute is not what it once was, but you can enter into it, like if it stretches into like a county, you can enter into an agreement with a county. Like, so if part of it's in the city and then half of it's in the county, you can enter into agreements to do urban renewal across those boundaries. So you can do that. So I think counties, I believe, can create urban renewal for county areas, but you know, obviously, from a city perspective, once the project area crosses over into a boundary of either another city or another county, they have to join in. There's some discussion about that in the state statute about how you address that, but you can do that. They do contemplate that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I mean, at this stage, we're just, you know, getting our toes, kind of dipping our toes in the water. So I think we're good for now. So thanks.
Mr. Scholl, in your answer to that question, I was confused. So I'd like you to clarify something for me.
Sure.
You said a county area, a county can develop or implement a URA for a county area. But once it crosses into a municipal boundary, then what's required is the municipal URA.
Yeah, and I apologize. I can't. It's not a situation that I've encountered, so I can't. But if you're splitting across a border, you have to have the consent of both of the jurisdictions. So if the create a project area that's city and county property, you have to have the consent, and there's a process, I think, that's outlined in the state statute, but I've not seen that, so it's not something I'm as familiar with.
Thank you. That helps me. Get a little better grasp on that. Councilmember Schmeckles.
Thank you, Mayor. And I do have quite a few questions here. So if you need to interrupt me to let someone else go, please feel free. My first question is actually, so I'm getting a permanent feed. Perhaps that's better.
Much.
Thank you. My first question is on behalf of one of our attendees, Trey Sherwood. As she and I were discussing this at lunch today, we're curious if there is the possibility to overlap a URA with a DDA district as well, or is that not allowed?
You know, that's a really good question, and I would kind of defer to an attorney. We work with Holland and Hart kind of as a collaborative partner, but I would kind of kick it over to your municipal attorney. I think that the challenge is if you can't have two tax increment districts over top of it, because who then gets the tax increment? Is it the DDA or the Urban Renewal Authority? So I think that question would need to be, it's one of the things that I think I discussed a little bit in my presentation, because it's fairly new. You don't necessarily have the legal guardrails that you do in states that have had urban renewal for 30 or 40 years and are widely used. I mean, in Colorado, for example, everything has been tested up to the state Supreme Court. So you know very clearly where your lines are. And in Wyoming, that hasn't happened yet. So I think some of these questions, I think I want to just be cautious about how I answer them. But I think in that you could create a project area within kind of a DDA boundary, as long as the DDA doesn't then create another project area over top of it. But I think that's something I would want to look at with an attorney as well, just to make sure that I'm not misunderstanding the state statute.
Okay, perfect. Getting that feedback again here. Hopefully, if we move forward with this, is this something that best fits for private capital or grant funding as a match? Are there things we should be avoiding, things like that, to kind of expand upon this earlier or a little bit further, and to add another facet to it here? This is for blighted properties, not for vacant lots. Is that correct? I'm thinking here of like our Sierra Sky Tech Park or the Turner Track as potential project locations that are currently vacant fields. Yeah.
It's not necessarily, it really just depends. I think in the instance like the hitching post, they called the back 40, there was kind of the vacant land kind of behind where those hotels were, which they included in anticipation of developing those in the future. But if you have areas that are vacant that maybe have had some prior use where there may be some environmental concerns, I think that is can be established as a condition of blight. So I think it doesn't necessarily preclude it. I do think there are some limitations on ag land, which I don't think would be a big issue in Laramie, where you can't go make an urban renewal designation on ag, obviously. So, but I do think depending on how what I'd have to look at kind of what the bigger project area is and what if there's structures and what the environmental conditions are, or what the other thing is if there's deficiencies in the infrastructure, is a condition of blight as well. If the water line is not aligned correctly, or the sewer line, or if there's stormwater issues. So there are ways you can do it. That's why I think when I said before, blight is it's a legal term of art. And so it's not, people think of it and they think of, the urban slums, and that's not really the case. I mean, there's a kind of a much broader view of that. So I do think, depending, it's something you can look into. I can't guarantee it's going to necessarily work, but I think I wouldn't just dismiss it out of hand, I guess.
Okay. More, may I ask more?
What's that?
Mayor, may I ask one more, please?
Yeah.
Perfect. Question is kind of probably a little bit obscure, but if there were 3 or 4 properties that were contiguous, that had maybe viable businesses on the first ground that were thriving, but the stories above that first ground area, could that be a TIF unto itself? Will those store or floors above the first, or include all of it, or?
Yeah, totally. I mean, like I said, I mean, it's not I'll give you kind of a hypothetical. So you have a 4-story building or a 3-story building, and you've got a retail business on the first floor, but you can't occupy the upper floors because you need an elevator for ADA requirements. You're functionally obsolete. So therein, you've met the legal term. So you could, in theory, look at things like that, or if upper stories have asbestos, or like I said, ADA requirements are always kind of even not just even elevators, but kind of the width of doorways is can be an issue too. In older buildings that they have narrow hallways and things like that. So there are you can use some of that. So the answer to the question is yes.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Harrington.
Thank you, Mayor, and thanks for joining us tonight, Mike. My question's a little more basic. I think both all the questions ahead of me were pretty in depth, and I was wishing I was as smart as those council members. So my question is maybe a little bit more to the beginning phases of a URA. So this would go to the voters then for adoption of the URA itself, or does the council form a URA?
The council, you have the authority to form an urban renewal. It does not require a vote.
Okay, and then as far as the next part, say we outline the URA in its sort of formation outlines a project map, that project area, and they complete those projects. Are we able to just continually add to this list and say we'd like to shift to over here now, and just sort of continue to shift what the project area would be? So as just maybe an example, we start with the North 4th corridor, which you referenced earlier, and say we complete that project and the URA is, and I may be misunderstanding how this functions, so that would be a fine answer too. But say we complete that project and the URA is continuing to generate revenue from that project. Can we then shift the URA's focus to a separate project area, maybe somewhere else in the city?
Yeah, I'll explain that kind of in a couple different ways. So bear with. So you can have you can create multiple project areas at the same time. So you can create one this year, 3 years, just this area, create another one. They can run at the same time. The issue is when you create the project area and you collect the tax increment, the tax increment you collect within that has to be reinvested within that project area that you've defined. So it being able to kind of spend that gets a little, you have to be careful about that. And again, I say that cautiously because, like I said, there isn't kind of a legal precedent that's been established on how do you operate and do tax increment in Wyoming. So I think that in theory, because you can enter into contracts, you could, create IGAs or different things with different project areas. But again, I think I don't want to get too far out ahead of myself on that. But as a rule of thumb, and just to be really consistent, the tax increment you collect within the project area needs to be reinvested in that project area. But you can have multiple project areas around the city. So the one, the North 4th, I think was one that's been discussed. There's a kind of a desire to go forward with that. Create a project area there, and then maybe there's a different area on the east side of town. You can create a project area there and establish the base and collect tax increment and reinvest it in there. So does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, it sure does. And I think one of the things I was trying to figure out is, because you mentioned earlier there's no time limitation on a URA, like I guess my curiosity then was, what is the end cap? Because presumably there's some end cap, right? But that end cap, I guess, naturally becomes project is funded and complete.
Well, in kind of the project is funded complete or whatever. So like in the instance, with Cheyenne, I mean, it's a kind of they're getting reimbursed up to 1.2 million, as an amount not to exceed based on kind of what they're putting in and interest potentially. But in theory, I mean, and this is again the part of the urban renewal where I'm very cautious because suppose the hitching post does gangbusters and that 1.2 million gets repaid in 4 years. So then what happens in the 5th year? I mean, can they look at, they could potentially take that revenue and other infrastructure within that project area. You can take on other, and you can keep it, into perpetuity now, for 10, 15, 20, 30 years. So if there are other needs within that area, you can make those investments and support different new investments. The challenge, I think, and I'm wading into this cautiously because it's more of a political discussion. It's, how long can will the entities kind of accept redirecting revenue, which would otherwise be going to them? And I think that's always been the big discussion, the big criticism. It's, you're using our revenue. It's not, I don't think it's a fair, I think it's a lot more complicated, and there would be no revenue if you weren't making that investment. So it's not always, but I do think at a certain point, it's just that little calculus you have to kind of take into account, like how long, I mean, if you could run it out for 50 years. But, can the project justify that? Is that what you need? Maybe you do need maybe 50 years to make a project work if it's a pretty bad area. But I mean, that's part of the strategic discussion that I think the Urban Renewal Authority and the city staff and have to kind of to help support some of these projects. So I hope that answers your question.
It does. Yeah. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Sure, Councilmember Harrington. I just want to toss out that, we can probably get into the weeds pretty deep on hypotheticals and things like that. I think a lot of this is going to be dependent on the project plan overall and what's determined at that stage of the process and the discussions that lead up to using some of these tools. And I think some of these questions would probably better be answered with the specificity of an identified project. Now, we have a couple of things in mind, of course, council members, but I think some of these questions probably fall into place more clearly when you're actually working on a project. And I think that's what we're hearing from Mr. Scholl too. That's not a comment towards anyone's questions. It's just something that occurs to me as we develop this conversation. I'd like to recognize Councilmember Somerville. And I know Councilmember Gabriel was waiting, but maybe he's had his question answered. Councilmember Gabriel, you're up then. You were next in order. So I'm going to call on you and then Councilmember Somerville.
I get tired of looking at my hand.
I understand.
Hey, Mike, thank you for the presentation. I was curious, familiar with the project and watched the history of hitching posts, having growing up in Cheyenne. So I know what you're talking about over there. And that was really a disappointing situation when they were going through that whole process. But, you talked about blight. And I think everybody on council would say we have blight right in the middle of downtown Laramie. And I was just wondering from your standpoint, what we can do with private property with this program when you have people that really aren't very cooperative and don't want to do much with property that is, right in the heart of the city.
Well, I always say, if I could answer that question, I would be the most gainfully employed consultant in the United States of America. I always kind of tell a story. I worked in a downtown where there was a property owner who refused to invest in any buildings and they were really in horrible condition. And he owned World War II tanks. that were operable. And he was damned if he was going to invest a penny, and that was his position. And I think to some degree, it's just the reality that you have to work around sometimes. And I think part of it is the hope. What I always try to focus on, particularly kind of in those downtown environments, is if you can bring up the tide, so that instead of getting $8 a square foot for a commercial, you can get 12. Then you create that economic justification. So those people that are like, well, wait a minute, the guy next door, they just got a great new, business, and they just made a big investment. And because, developers and real estate people are, they'll get jealous and they'll see, they want to copy whatever the neighbor did. So to the extent that you can kind of use it to work with properties that you can develop, or property owners that are willing and have an interest in investment, and you can start to raise the bar a little bit, I think you're going to pull those property owners that you talked about up, but I just confess, it's not an easy discussion to have. And so, and I've had projects that, you just have to work around some of those people sometimes. And it's, so I hope that kind of answers your.
You bet. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Got Councilmember Somerville.
Thank you, Mayor. And I'm not sure if this question is going to be for Mike or for Todd, but I'm a big fan of trying to make this work here in Laramie, but I'm also cognizant of our city resources that don't exist in terms of staffing to help manage these projects. If we started with one project, can we associate staffing or needed consultant costs or legal work with that project and use funds to help pay for that? And two, if we can, as we add more projects, can we spread that out over the projects? Or is the answer the city just needs to be prepared to kind of front the money for anything the urban renewal agency needs for staffing?
Honorable Mayor, through you to Councilor Somerville, our intent on this between Janine and I and the folks that have discussed it is to potentially look at contracting with Ayers and Associates to lead us through the legal requirements and the items related to the creation of the URA. Then at that point, I believe that there's some other contractual work that we'll do with potentially Ayers about blighting areas of blight and defining project areas for specific projects as we move forward. And then after that, I don't believe the impact is huge on staff. It's more of an impact on the URA board that's going to be doing the work and bringing forward projects to us, if I understand that correctly. Is that correct, Mike?
To some extent. I mean, I think for the example in Cheyenne, I was able to work with staff, and staff did a lot of the work, quite frankly, of doing the blight studies, because they're not terribly complicated. But I will say that I would just kind of ask and make sure that, that if whatever your legal staff, that they're comfortable kind of with the state statutes, because Cheyenne, my experience with Cheyenne is they were understaffed, and they had some staff leaving and for different reasons, and so they only had one attorney at the time, so they had which was, I think, really challenging. So the legal work, I think, can make sure that you're on strong legal footing. So that's something to keep in mind. And then I think when you get in, sometimes it's the staff time becomes more the marketing and recruitment and the developer engagement that occurs. But the plan is strategically, if you can get a project going and you can get some revenue, I think there's some opportunity where you can have that revenue to support some staff. There's some allocate or some allowances for that, for either staff time or however you manage that. So it does require some upfront investment of time, either through kind of existing staff or contracted staff. But I think it's fairly manageable. I think if you talk to the folks in Cheyenne, it's not, you're not talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars in consultant time. And a lot of this stuff can be done with, you know, the city staff. So, so I don't know, the city manager Feeser, I'm not sure if that kind of answered the question, but.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things is from a legal perspective is we may actually look at contracting out legal support too for this project. So if we do handle this correctly and do it right with contractual labor, we can minimize the impact to staff and help keep these development projects at the forefront and moving forward. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember O'Doherty.
I have what feels like a stupid question. The taxes are assessed and collected by the county, and the city gets a small portion of that. So would it be the city's portion of the taxes? I'm not sure how that works. Thanks.
No, it's you get the revenue that's collected through all taxing entities. So that's the rub. You know, because you get the county, the other taxing districts, it kind of all flows back into the special fund for the urban renewal. So, and that's very direct, right in the state statute. So it's everything.
Councilmember O'Doherty, anything else? Nope. Okay. All right. Council members, very important to be cognizant of time this evening, because of course we also have a special meeting immediately following this, but I appreciate this discussion very much. I think it's not the end, of course, and in fact there'll be more detailed conversations to come. I'm not seeing any of the hands popping up. Staff folks, in this case, particularly Assistant City Manager and our City Attorney, I think you've heard questions from the council members about some of the particulars of this, and I think you've heard support for this as it was included in the council goals from the beginning of the year. So I think you see a council interested in this, maybe interested perhaps with regard to what specific projects it might be applied to, but it sounds like there's some steps that need to be taken before we get even into specific projects. But I think you're seeing support for it. I don't see any of the hands popping up for questions.
Honorable Mayor, I would expect that once Janine gets back and we have a chance to discuss this a little bit further, that we'll be talking about ways to move forward into the creation of the URA, which I believe is our next step, and the legal authority behind that, and work with Mike and Christina to help us make that happen. So I imagine that over the course of the next few months, you'll see some things moving forward.
Appreciate that, Assistant City Manager. And then, I have a comment that I'd like to direct towards, I guess at this point, it's just Councilor Schuster and the Vice Mayor, which is that Assistant City Manager Darragon told us years ago to do this. We're getting around to it now. I'm sure you'd be glad to see it happening at some point. All right. Let's see if there's any public comment. And we'll go ahead and make it with respect to the work session item if there is any. Probably going to be future opportunities to discuss this that might be more informative. But all right, seeing none, we'll go ahead and close public comment and move on. And we'd like to thank the folks from AIRS. We'd like to thank Scholl, Ms. Heigl for being here. Christina, you didn't have much to say in there tonight. Do you want to add anything to this discussion that you didn't get a chance to because we didn't ask you? You don't have to. Just say no.
I appreciate you all and the time allowed us to talk about this today. I think it's a great opportunity for Laramie, and I know Mike has used this very successfully in other cities around the region, and it's sure an awesome tool that we could tap into and really promote some great investment, especially I know housing is one of the big issues we're looking at recently. So excited to get going on it. So thank you.
Thank you. What a great way to cap off that discussion. Council, if there's any objection, we'll go ahead and close the work session. Thank our guests this evening. Thank you, Assistant City Manager Feeser, for helping us with that part of the meeting tonight. Good evening, folks that have to go. Council members, the risk of some controversy, I suggest that we do the following. I'm going to suggest that the council members take a few minutes, 4 minutes or so, 5 minutes tops, to look at the maps for the ward districts that have been submitted at the 11th hour. And I'm going to ask the city clerk to also get those ready for inevitably for when she's asked to put them up so that we can look at them. I believe there are 3 maps that have been delivered in the last few or so. City clerk, if you're ready to go with those, that's fantastic. I'm going to ask that the city council members take just a few minutes, we'll just say 2 or 3, to get those ready and to familiarize yourself with those as best as you can. And that's, I'm going to call for the recess now. And I will be back here with you in just a few minutes. Yes.
Mayor, we still have agenda review on the work session. Did you want to complete that before we take our recess?
I really don't, because I think we're pressed for time. And I think I'd ask the council to bring up any particular questions they have under agenda review, if they need to. Otherwise, I would like to move on, because that work session took some considerable time. So take a few minutes, folks. Council members, I'm going to suggest that without objection, we just consider adding to the very end of our agenda for the special meeting and agenda review portion, if need be. If need be, we'll ask for changes or suggestions about the agenda at the end. It's tough to have two important topics in one evening. Never like to do it, but I also know folks don't like to meet every Tuesday and Wednesday. So that's just how we have to do things sometimes. All right, City Clerk, do we need an announcement for the special meeting? Go ahead, please.
Notice is hereby given that a work session followed by a special meeting of the Laramie City Council will be held Tuesday, March 29th, 2022 at 6:00 p.m. following the previously called work session via Zoom. Webinar ID 845-5567-3516, passcode 075836 for the following purpose. Work session 1, economic development tools and tax increment financing districts. The special meeting item number 1, original ordinance number 2042, amending the Laramie Municipal Code, chapter 2.04 to adjust ward boundaries to have nearly equal proportions after the 2020 census, on third and final reading, introduced by O'Doherty. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, City Clerk. Following format, see if there's any public comment on anything, I guess. It doesn't say on non-agenda items. I'm going to ask that it be on non-agenda items because folks will have time to make public comment on agenda items. Any public comment on non-agenda items? Non-agenda items. Non-agenda items. Vice Mayor, before I go to the public comment, did you have a comment or an issue?
Yeah, I think we need to do roll call and call the meeting to. We need to do roll call.
Yeah, sorry. Let's have a roll call.
Humby.
Here.
Gabriel.
Here.
Harrington.
Here.
O'Doherty.
Here.
Schmeckel.
Here.
Schuster.
Here.
Somerville.
Here.
Pierce.
Here.
Weaver.
Here.
That's 9 present and 0 absent, Your Honor.
Thank you, City Clerk, and thank you, Vice Mayor. And yes, the meeting is called to order for March, the special meeting of the City Council for March 29th, 2022. All right, so public comments. And I have Susan Simpson. Let's let Mrs. Simpson into the room, and you have the floor.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening.
You've done a lot of, can you hear me successfully?
Yes.
Feedback? Okay, good. You have done a lot of work on redistricting, and I want to make 2 points, I guess. I live in what's now 13-3. I've lived here over 50 years. I have voted at Vital School. I have voted at Spring Creek School. I voted at the public library. I voted at Spring Creek School, and I voted at the courthouse. I was on the committee that set up the wards after the election that went from 7 wards to 3. I remember at-large counselors. I also remember one of the library elections long ago. There was a very small ward. It had something like 118 registered voters, and only 40 of them voted in that election. I think that when the redistricting is being considered, that communities of interest is really important. And my concern is that the West Side and West Laramie are a community of interest. And I know that I've heard counselors say that they hope that the division would create more West Laramie people running for city council in 2 wards instead of in just 1 ward. And I think That is an admirable desire, but I don't think it will come to fruition. And if you make a mistake with this, we're going to have 10 years of the west side of West Laramie being split in half, and the resentment that that could foster for voters over there. I'm very concerned about that. And as an election judge, I'm thinking about passing out ballots. And so I encourage you to pay close attention to what our county clerk, Jackie Gonzalez, said and what former State Senator Mike Massey said about considerations for wards in Laramie. I thank you for your work, and we can agree and still like each other and still work together. And I think we've done that through the years. Go for it.
Thank you very, very much. And if that had been anybody other than Susan Simpson, I would have reminded them that we're looking for any comments that aren't on the subject, and it's totally fine because Susan Simpson's credentials in this area are impeccable, and she can talk to the council about that issue whenever we provide the floor. All right, let's go ahead and move on and get into the issue then, because I think that's what most of our attendees may have comment or not about. This item has been introduced in the last several meetings by Councilmember O'Doherty. We'll call on Councilmember O'Doherty to introduce it again.
I move to approve original ordinance number 2042 on third and final reading, amending Laramie Municipal Code Chapter 2.04 to adjust ward boundaries to have nearly equal proportions after the 2020 census and authorize the mayor and clerk to sign.
Second.
Motion and a second by Councilmember Somerville. All right, council members, were you all able to get a look at the maps that had come in most recently? If you hadn't been already, I know a couple of them had come in relatively quickly. All right, and we had hoped to try to get as many maps as possible in before tonight. But fortunately, we've seen enough iterations of these maps. I think that we have a general idea about what most of them do. And as council members, you have a general idea of where ward boundaries sit or may sit, depending on the proposal. Okay. I'm not going to ask that we really do much of a background on this, City Clerk, but if you want to just give the most general overview of the process, that would be great.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mayor. The City Council began work on the ward boundaries in November. Since then, we've had several work sessions to talk about ward boundaries and begin selecting options for redrawing those boundaries. Most recently, on March 15th, March 22nd, the City Council adopted Map 1B. So as it currently stands, that's the way the ordinance is drafted. So with that, Mayor, if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
City Clerk, are there any questions? I'm looking. Thank you, City Clerk, is what I meant to say. Yes, Councilmember Gabriel.
Thanks, Mayor. I had a question for the city clerk on the map that was sent out Thursday after meeting with the county folks plus 3 counselors. 1F, is that the map that was circulated, and has that been changed since that circulation last Thursday?
Mayor, through you to Councilor Gabriel, Map 1F has not changed since last Thursday.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for the City Clerk, who has been a very fortunate asset for the council as we've gone through this process, as has the county clerk's office. City Clerk?
Mayor, if I could just add one final iteration on this. Tonight's goal is to set the final draft of the map so that the city attorney's office, along with our GIS analyst and myself, we can finalize that draft of the ordinance for you for the April 5th meeting for adoption.
Thank you very much for that important point, City Clerk. That's right. We need to get the boundary set in place because the legal description needs to be included in the ordinance. I'd also like to thank the city attorney for his work that he's done for us throughout this process and answering our questions. It's not the most usual thing for a council to do, seeing as it comes along once a decade or so. And as I said at the last meeting, and I just kind of want to state again, both for all of us and for anybody paying attention, it's an unusual process. And of course, this is the first time that we have handled a redistricting process with the system referenced by Ms. Simpson of the 3 wards with 3 members each. It's the first go around for that since it was put into place, and it's certainly been interesting. Councilmember O'Doherty, you have the floor still, so I'm going to go to you.
I have an amendment, but I was wondering if my amendment is that I propose this Laramie Ward Proposal 3-3 because it keeps the west side whole. It keeps West Laramie and the west side together. It would give them better proportional representation in 1 ward than having them having that split into 2, north and south. It mimics the current map. Should we get a second, and then I could ask the clerk to bring it up?
I'll second, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, we have a motion and a second from Councilmember Harrington, and then we'll go ahead and have the map put up.
So, City Clerk, it's 3-3. So this starts out sort of like the status quo, except it adds more room for growth in the southeast of Ward 2, the yellow. It allows Ward 3 about the same, but it extends further west. The nice thing about this map is if you live in House District 14 and you're in the city, you know you're in Ward 3. If you are in House District 46 and you live in the city, you know you're in Ward 1. So it's only House Districts 45 and 13 that have 2 have 2 wards in them. So it's a total of 6 precincts within the city. I found it easy to describe this with text. I think it makes it easier for voters. And I also have a map that a pie chart that I would ask the city clerk if she could display for me, please.
Yes, I'd like to take a look at the pie chart that the council member has asked, and then after we do that, if we could go back to the map after we've looked at the pie chart. And city clerk, I have a suggestion when we come back to the map so people can see it. If the city clerk would zoom in on the portion of the map that mostly takes in the city, and you can kind of cut off the airport a little bit. And the reason I ask that we do that is so we can have a good look at those street boundaries, more so than the airport. But I understand the council member would like us to look at the charts first.
Mayor and Councilor O'Doherty, I am not finding a pie chart. Can I?
Oh, it's in the email. It's in the email that I sent with the map. I can pull it up. The point is that I was trying to show it as a pie chart because I thought it'd be more convincing. So it says proportions in West Laramie PDF in the email that was sent at 12:49 p.m. Board map proposal 3-3. I can resend.
Councilor O'Doherty, I have assigned you as a co-host if you would like to share that.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you. So this has worried me that by splitting the west side and West Laramie, the intent was to give them more of a voice, but I can't imagine any universe where this is true because in Proposal 1D, Ward 1 is 77% people east of the tracks, 19% of people west of the river, and 14% people on the, 4% people on the west side. Ward 2 in that scenario has 77% of the population east of the tracks, 23% in West Laramie, and 5% on the west side. So on the right, my proposal gives the ward, my Ward 1 proposal has the area west of the river is 43% of the population, and the west side is 9% of the population, giving 52% to people west of the tracks. So I think they were more likely to have a voice. And I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, Councilmember O'Doherty. And City Clerk, I'm going to ask you if you can, when you bring up the map again, try to zoom in a little bit for us, just because it's easier to look at the streets. I'm sorry to always be asking you to do 100 different things with these screen shares. We appreciate it. Councilmember O'Doherty.
I can describe this if you want. So the boundary between the pink and the yellow, it comes down 3rd Street and then goes across at Harney and then south on 9th Street and then east on Spring Creek and south on Boulder Road, I think is the name. No, south on 15th to the city limit, and then it goes around the city boundary and up by Bill Nye and up to Grand Avenue west on Grand Avenue, north on 30th, west on Willett, north on 15th. And the rest you can figure out from the boundaries. That's it. That's my proposal. Thank you.
Let's have questions and discussion on this proposal, on this amendment proposal. Councilmember Harrington, you're up.
Thanks, Mayor. I'll be brief because I think Councilor Doherty's visual aids and things made the case that I would like to make extremely well. I think this map does a good job at keeping the neighborhoods of interest, communities of interest west of the railroad tracks whole, and I think that is an important step for this council to take. I think that does matter, and so I will just leave it there, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate it.
Okay, you're more than welcome, Councilmember Harrington. We have other discussion about this map or questions for Councilmember O'Doherty about this map. Okay, Councilmember Gabriel.
Yes, thanks, Mayor. I would just point everyone to Erin's email that she sent out at 12:49 today that details everything, the percentages and so on. It's very helpful. You can see the map. You can blow it up a little bit better, maybe. That was the only point I wanted to make. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Gabriel. Anybody else? Any other council members? Yes. Council members Schuster and Schmeckel, I'm going to admit that I was looking at the map, and so I don't know who was first. I think it's Councilmember Schmeckel.
It was a tie.
I was actually at the Councilmember Schuster.
All right. Sorry. Yeah, everybody's arranged differently on each other's screens, Councilmember Schmeckel. So I thought you were saying, it's me. It's me. We're going to go to Councilmember Schuster.
Okay, thank you. I still have a little, I got a note in my door. I got calls from people today when I was out of town and was a little late getting back here. I still don't see where the growth patterns are equal on this. We are fighting so hard to make sure that everybody has the opportunity They said that on the bottom of the map that Ward 2 there can grow. I don't see that as being an ideal growth place, so I'm still not sold on this map, and I know we'll talk about it a lot, so I'll just go with that I'm not sold on the growth patterns. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Schuster. Councilmember Schmeckel, thanks for waiting. Now go to the Vice Mayor, and then keep going in order. Councilmember Schmeckel, please.
Thank you, Mayor. I will say that I share concerns that maybe this map doesn't have an equal distribution of new growth, but I do think that there is significant potential with the university, as well as in that northwest corner of Ward 2 on the 4th Street corridor for an additional development in this system. My desire to treat neighborhoods equally is to treat neighborhoods equally, and I still question why the Tree neighborhood is singled out as a neighborhood that can be divided, but no other neighborhoods can. No one has really given me what I would consider a satisfactory answer on that, but I do recognize that this map treats most neighborhoods fairly or equally, and I prefer map 1G to this, but I'm not opposed to this map. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. I have to agree with Councilor Schuster here. I think I don't see it, and it's not that I want to disregard the effort and the time spent on this, but I just don't see it. I too also much prefer 1G, and I'm actually pretty darn fond of 1H if we get there, but I'm not going to initially support this in the go around and for this amendment. So thanks.
Anybody else for the first time? Okay, Councilmember Somerville, first time.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have a quick question. I was digging through my email trying to find it. City Clerk, can you remind us what the population breakdowns are for each of these 3 wards as they're drawn?
On the map.
Oh, it must be off to the left. Hold on.
Yeah, let me zoom out here.
I have it in front of me if you'd like me just to speak it.
Please.
Okay. Ward 1 would be 10,214. Ward 2 would be 10,914. Ward 3 would be 10,268.
Councilmember Somerville, you have the floor.
Thank you. If I can just have just a second, I just wanted to do some math here real quick. So I guess I have a question for Councilor Doherty on the math, because there's a 6.5% deviation in population between wards 1 and 2. That would put us outside of the 5%. Am I doing that right? Or am I missing something?
5% plus or minus. 5% plus or minus. So Ward 2, I made it bigger so that it would be on the upper end of the plus. So it's plus 0.423%. The other 2 are on the lower end of the deviation. But they're all within plus or minus 5%, well within.
Mayor, could I just ask a clarifying question, and fully admitting that I am not a redistricting expert in any way, shape, or form. So when I met with the clerks on Thursday, I think the low end of population we were looking at was 10.2 and the high end was 10.8 or 860 or something along those lines. Could somebody just give me a quick explanation on to how we should be calculating that and how that works, just to refresh my memory?
Councilmember Somerville, who do you want to direct that question towards? I guess Councilmember O'Doherty looks like she's ready to answer it, so I want to give her an opportunity.
So the range is 9939 to 10985 to stay within plus or minus 5% of the ideal, which is 10462. So I packed in Ward 2 with near the max. There is room for growth because there's already growth down between Corthell Hill and 17th Street, and we expect growth on the Turner track. So that's why I extended down that far. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Cumby, you hadn't spoken yet and you had your hand up a few minutes ago, so I'm trying to go first time.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For some of the reasons that Councilor Schuster and Vice Mayor Pierce have already spoken, I do not support this map, and I'm strongly in favor of map 1G. And I just think that this division does not reflect the growth patterns, and I just have believed that we have a lot of growth on the east side, and I think that we would benefit on the west side by the redistricting form of map 1G. So that is the one that I would support. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Cumby. Councilmember, I'm sorry, folks. It's always just too close of a call. It's the second speaking list. Let's go to Councilmember Harrington, since Councilmember Schuster's generous that way.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks, Councilmember Schuster. So, Mr. Mayor, I think I'm trying to figure out what the conversation about growth area, I'm trying to place in my mind, looking at this map, where we're lacking in growth area, or even if that should be a reasonable consideration at all, especially given the 700 people difference between wards already. Presumably Ward 2 is the one that council is worried about not having growth potential. That would be my assumption. But I would also remind the council that there is a significant parcel of city-owned land that we just addressed as a goal in our goal setting to develop with dense housing in Ward 2. There is presumably going to be some development between Corthell and 17th, as was mentioned before, but also the remainder of that section where you can see the 13 on this map between Corthell and the high school is also land that I would say is quite desirable for development. Certainly more desirable than, say, like the northwest corner of Ward 1. It seems like we're pinning all of the growth of Ward 1 on Wyotech, and I certainly wish them the best in that development, but I think if you look at this large swath of land as an option for redevelopment, and then Wyotech's interest in redevelopment, those, I think we're really just reading tea leaves here, Mr. Mayor, and I'm not sure that that's the best thing for us to draw a 10-year map based on that will have pretty significant consequences if the alternative is selected for some communities of interest. I think to call them anything else is not fair. So, Mr. Mayor, I would just say that I think the eastern pressure for growth is largely in that southeastern corner, and is largely out of space because it's capped by county development. So if you were going to, there may be development on the North 4th, the North Tank redevelopment potential, I suppose, could happen. But I think this assumption that no growth potential exists in all of the wards is a red herring. I'm not sure that that's an argument worth this council pursuing, because it seems to be counter to the planning that we have done as a council. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Schuster.
Okay, I think that's my cue, so I will start. one of my biggest concerns is I never like it that we say our group is a big family and we want you to leave us alone. And I don't like that, and I'll just tell you why. 15 years ago, we used to have to approve the city budget by 3/4 of a vote of the council people. And there was a time that it was a former councilor and myself said we disagree with this budget because they were throwing a huge amount of money into one 20 square block of the city, all for visual improvements. And myself and another councilman refused to approve the budget. And I said, I'm going to get a pillow out because I'm not going to approve this. And if I need to stay here tonight, because they said we couldn't leave till we approved it, we finally negotiated $12 million to go into West Laramie, because I thought that's the place where it needed to be the best. And off Snowy Range Road, one block, each direction, we paved the streets. Now, if any council person isn't working for the good of the entire city of Laramie, where we put in, I don't even know how many streets there was, probably 25, 30 blocks of street we put in West Laramie, because we figured when our budget was good at that time, that we should be spreading it out equally in the city. So I don't like to say that, I just don't like it that people say, well, we're one big family and we don't want to be split up. And my goodness, I don't like that, because it sounds like they want to say, okay, what we do here is ours and what you do there is yours. I just don't like it. And I believe in the entire city. Yes, I work in West Laramie. All the streets I drive on are paved, 100% of them. So it wasn't going to benefit me one bit on that there, but I felt they deserved it, so made sure they got it. Every street project they have had come up in front of me, I approve it. I realize some people would like them all to be done now, but that's not going to happen. So, no, I still don't like this one, because it feels like we are dividing up the city and our group over here doesn't want to be with your group over there. I don't like that. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Mayor?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I would like to somewhat echo Councilor Harrington's comments regarding, it's really hard to predict the future, right? But I have to look back a little bit, and the bottom line is our census numbers were off. We all know that our census numbers are off. And I'm going to just make an assumption, and I know that's, the sentence that follows, but I'm going to guess that the Ward 2 as designed by map 3.3 is probably the area that we lost a lot of that population, right? If you kind of do a semicircle around the university and housing and stuff like that. So we already know that the Ward 2 numbers are the yellow area, that 10914, did I get that right? I have my glasses on. 10914 is already much larger. And I think for any kind of development to catch up to the people we missed, in terms of housing or whatever, is really going to be significant. And I just can't see this map withstanding the test of time, assuming that we actually get a good count 10 years from now, or 8 years from now, or whenever they do it for 2030. So and Councilor Harrington is right. How do you predict certain things? We know a couple projects or a couple housing areas that didn't get included, but we're only talking about housing. I mean, we've got other economic things that could occur. So he's right. It's really hard to predict the future, but I'd just like to look back and look at all the folks that weren't counted and where the majority of them probably were living and are living today, perhaps.
Thank you. Vice Mayor or Councilmember Somerville?
Thank you, Mayor. In looking at and considering this map in particular, I can see where, that in terms of trying to, the call to keep the West Side whole, that certainly makes some sense with this map. The biggest concern that I have is, Councilor Schuster gave us a very eloquent summary of how redistricting has gone the last 2 times for the city of Laramie. And so here we are doing redistricting for the first time with a 3-ward map. And it's pretty important to me, given what we've seen with other redistricting efforts, not at the local level, that we try to create a map that anticipates growth, could potentially be more stable so that in 10 years the map could be tweaked, and that really blends those concerns that Councilor Schuster talked about. So, in respect, right, if we look at concerns across the city, if you live in the tree area, you probably have had some pipe issues at some point in time. West Laramie is infrastructure, right? The eastern side of the city has different concerns in terms of drainage and other development that's gone out there. And that's really important to me, that even though we have 3 separate wards, as I've stated before, kind of in specific to everything west of the tracks, that we get council members that are more educated about the range of issues going on across the city and not just that particular issue. And I don't think this map does that. I also have some concerns about geographical balance, again, in terms of land mass. I have concerns that we're packing people in too tight, in Ward 2 especially. That's a lot of people in that ward. That's a pretty big gap. And when I've been looking at maps, I think, the city ordinance says to try to cut it into, as nearly equal populations as we can. And I know that's not easy. That's certainly, I know Councilor Doherty has spent more hours than anybody else trying to make all of these blocks work. And I'd be happy to sign on to a letter to the federal government about how they draw their census blocks when we're all done. I'd also like to not be on council in 2030 when they try to do this again. But I guess the biggest thing I want to speak to is that concern about West Laramie and the West Side. And having lived in West Laramie for 20 years, I know what this neighborhood is. I know what the West Side is. I've been representing them for quite some time. And I think all of the things, I won't say them again, but at the previous meetings hold true, that we would be better served with a different type of map. And due to the population density in the tree area, this type of map is not going to improve that situation. And I guess that's one of my biggest concerns. I would also tell the council that I've spent an enormous amount of time over the last 2 weeks. I was able to meet with a couple of council members and the county clerk to look at things. And I have fielded a total of three constituent calls / conversations, specifically constituents that live west of the tracks. And I just want to share these with the council. One of them said, 1B, we love it. We love being more included in the city, go for it. One of them told me, if you're going to split one, split them both. That's fine. Just do it equally. And one of them said, we don't care what you do with West Laramie, just keep the West Side intact. So, and that's just 3. 3 people is all that has reached out to me, even with the press and the articles that have gone out. So I would like the opportunity to explain 1G and 1H to the council, because they are drastically different maps. I call 1H the compromise map that I think gets it what everybody wants. And then 1G is an updated version of 1B to assuage any concerns we had from the county clerk. I hope this is not the map we vote in right now. I guess I would ask the council to consider a little bit different geography for the map. And I hope I get a chance to show that to the council with the other 2 maps. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Harrington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think I'll just leave the conversation. You all know the milestone goal under holistic economic development, milestone 3. I think it's number B, that outlines the Turner Track development is a high priority of the city. I'll just leave that there for this growth area thing. I wanted to, Councilor Schuster mentioned something about trying to like lock in West Laramie. And I just wanted to make sure that that I wasn't saying anything that was really my intention. I don't live in West Laramie or the West Side. And I think, frankly, if I were to run my campaign only in West Laramie, I would likely not be sitting here with you all. And I think that's exactly maybe, the point. And I think it illustrates maybe the opposite of what Councilor Schuster was fearing and really emphasizes the thing that he's hoping this council does. I don't live there. And I spend in maybe a disproportionate amount of my time working on issues in West Laramie, by comparison to the populations of Ward 1. I think many of you could say a very similar thing. I think this council largely, and councils in the past, like Councilor Schuster said, I mean, there's a precedent on I guess a precedent from the city council, the city of Laramie, of investing in West Laramie. There's a significant discrepancy in their infrastructure, and it is simply just going to take a long time to remedy that issue. But I think my interest in not splitting them has nothing to do with trying to be exclusionary or sort of isolating to West Laramie. And in fact, I think it's just the opposite. The principle of cracking and gerrymandering is that you divide a neighborhood and then fill the majority of the representation elsewhere. And I think the maps that Councilor Somerville just mentioned, 1H and 1G, do that to varying degrees. And I think 1B, save for that middle section, is far more understandable of a split than some of those other maps that sort of draw out like northern sections of West Laramie and little chips. But we can get to that later. And I would just say my opinion on this is largely informed. Councilor Somerville said that what she said in the previous meetings holds true still. And a lot of my opinion is formed around that. I mean, in the first meeting on new maps, she indicated that there was a need to have more representation from West Laramie. I took that to heart. I just don't think splitting them in half achieves that goal. So, Mr. Mayor, I would just leave it at that. And thanks for letting me just talk over and over and over.
No, it's in order. It's fine. Always. Just as long as we stay on the subject, which everyone is doing. Councilmember Schmeckel.
Thank you, Mayor. I will note that we have admitted Clerk Gonzalez to the group here, and I would like her to, I'm interested in hearing if she has any comments, including I would like to have her give us some clear definition as to the variance on that plus or minus 5%, because I think that there's been some confusion around that.
Thank you, Councilmember Schmeckel. So that's a question for the county clerk, and we're happy to have the county clerk with us. County clerk, would you like to address that question for the council member?
Can you repeat that question, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, the question from Councilmember Schmeckel was to get general impressions about this map in terms of the concerns from the clerk's office in terms of administration, and also to address that issue of population and the issue of deviation that we've talked about, and bringing some clarity as to what the council's responsibility is with respect to weighing that factor when we decide on a map. Is that correct, Councilmember Schmeckel? All right.
Thank you, Mayor. First, with the deviation, the numbers that Councilmember O'Doherty gave were correct. As far as a plus 5% would be around 10,985, 88, somewhere in there, based on what total population you're working with. I think there's some slight differences, but they're really close. I think just missing a census block here or there with some of the maps I've worked with. The negative 5% would be 9,000 940-ish. So with proposal 3.3, yeah, as you can see, those populations all meet that criteria. Out of the 3 that have been presented today, I think our team has kind of agreed with Councilmember O'Doherty's proposal in 3.3 is very similar to the 2.1 that we proposed. It keeps a low amount of precincts, which is easier for our elections team funding. And we just feel like the splits are a lot better. The road boundaries are clear for descriptions. So some of those are the key points that we've gone with in making our maps.
Okay, any follow-up to what we heard? All right, Councilmember Somerville.
Thank you, Mayor. So I just want to be clear, because that's different than the notes that I had written down from Thursday's meeting with the clerk's office. So we could technically, if we had a ward that was 9,940 and a ward that was 10,988, I think is what he said, we would have a 10% deviation between those 2 wards, and that's okay. Is that what I heard?
Correct, Councilmember. Plus 5% and minus 5%, so total you get a 10% total deviation between the top and the bottom.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we appreciate that information. Is there any other follow-up? Councilmember O'Doherty.
I want to add that the reason I filled up Ward 2 close to the top was that the complaints about Proposal 3 was that 2 was too constrained. And also I put Wards 1 and 3 on the lower end of the deviation because we know that apartments went in, even if you don't consider the census errors. And I think the census errors are probably split in all 3 of these wards because of the student housing that's not university housing. That's where those errors were. And I think we estimated from the American Community Survey that it was probably off by about 1,000 people. And I think that they're distributed in those 3 wards. But we know that there were townhouses built on near Indian Paintbrush since the census that have become occupied. We know there are apartments over off of Snowy Range Road near the Family Dollar that are occupied since the census. So that's why I made those lower and went to near the top with 2 because of complaints about my last attempt. Thank you.
Any further comment, Councilor Somerville? You still have your hand up, but I don't know if that's just left over. Okay. Further comment or questions before we go to public input? All right. Let's see if there's public comment on the amendments. We've got Mr. Brett Glass first. Let's let Mr. Brett Glass, you've got the floor.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Looking at the proposal 3-3, it looks a lot like the old map, which I guess I don't know if you don't want too much change, that's a good thing. But it has some negative things about it that I'm a little concerned about. It has the largest difference between the wards, so 700 or more between wards 1 and ward 2 of any of the proposals, any of the new proposals that are on the agenda, including G and H. And the biggest difference of all is in Ward 2, which, as as Councilor Pierce mentioned, we knew that we had a deficit in the in the census, which I think was definitely more than 1,000 people based on what we've seen in our neighborhood. So I'm a little bit concerned about that. Yes, it does follow the state districts, but again, the state districts were gerrymandered very specifically to on the basis of on the basis of partisan elections, and of course, council is a nonpartisan body. So we don't necessarily want to follow those. Yes, we don't want to make things too hard for the county clerk, but the partisan boundaries don't necessarily follow the boundaries for interests on the local level, and so I think we should be careful of that. Now, Ms. Simpson and a couple of other speakers talked about splitting neighborhoods, and the thing that I'd like to say about that is, unlike in a situation where you have partisan divides and you have the people who are elected following partisan agendas, splitting a neighborhood is actually good because it gives it more representation. There isn't a danger of someone just following a party agenda and ignoring a large portion of the population. And so, to my mind, splitting, for example, the west side and West Laramie is actually a good thing. It gives them more representation. Having a line that goes through downtown, as in Proposal 1G, is actually good for downtown because it has more opportunities to get representation on council and more council members who are involved with that neighborhood. The same with Corthell Hill. And so I think that splitting things is actually good. As for growth, well, as Babe Ruth famously said, it's hard to make predictions, especially about the future. And we really don't know where all the growth is going to be. But definitely, if we if we split things up a little more, we're hedging our bets. Right now, if you take a look at this map, the area that we see some areas grouped together that are least likely to grow, especially in Ward 2, and then some that are much more likely to grow. In this case, 1 and 3. But we don't know for sure. There is a lot of opportunity, especially in the Turner Tract, for infill in Ward 2, and in fact we've already approved that. So in fact, depending on exactly how things pan out with developers, it could happen anywhere. I really think, again, we should pay more attention to making sure that we have more representation for people on council. So in short, I would prefer Proposal 1G, which really hasn't been shown on the screen yet, as a better balance between as a better balance between all of these concerns, and as a way of making sure that we have maximum representation of the neighborhoods that are underrepresented. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up for comment, we have Mr. Klaus Haubsget. Let's let Mr. Haubsget into the room. You have the floor.
Hope you can all hear me. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me. I appreciate all of you and the effort you have put into this redistricting plan. I have to admit, I've come late to the party here. Wasn't paying much attention, was sidetracked. So I know you're up against the clock. I might have gone for a different plan than this 3-3, but I would like to throw my support towards it. I've actually lived in all of the wards the way 3-3 is. I grew up on the north side. After I moved out of my parents' house, I lived in Ward 2, and I currently live in Ward 1 for over 30 years. Every community has its own distinct flavor. It's vibrant. We have great communities in Laramie. I disagree with Brian that this map will divide, Councilor Schuster, that this map will divide us and it'll be us against them. I think this will get some ideas out, some representation out from the different communities, and I think that'll be good for Laramie. I think it'll be good for Laramie's growth. I would hope that you would vote for this. I like this better than 1B. West Side and West Laramie, it's special to me. I've been out here a long time. The whole community is special to me. I don't think we have to fear each other. I think we need to work together with each other. Who knows where growth is going to come from? East side, north side, west side. We got all kinds of opportunities, and we should look at all of this. 10 years from now, another city council, another county commission will decide what things will be, where the growth is going to be, where the money is going to be spent. This is a good thing. I like what you're doing here. The west side and tracts west of Laramie has a minor population. So if you divide us, we're only going to have less representation. And yes, the way the map 1B was, if everybody was to unite in Ward 1 and Ward 2 and vote for people that lived west of the tracks, we could have six city councilors. Realistically, that ain't gonna happen. Not a chance in heck. There's too much population on the east side of the tracks. So please give this map some consideration. I love the west side. I love West Laramie. I think we can all work this out together and make Laramie and Albany County a better place to live. Couple of other points. I'm glad Mr. Schuster, Councilor Schuster, can drive paved roads to his work. That is awesome. I live on Snowy Range Road. We have a block paved roads each way, east and west, I'm sorry, north and south of Snowy Range Road. Once you get past that, it's dirt roads. The city did a study a couple years ago, or paid somebody to do a study, where they evaluated what was going on in Laramie, what we could do to make Laramie better, how we could join other cities of our size in development and forward-looking opportunities. I tried to find that report earlier this evening and I failed. Hopefully one of you know where it is. But the report stated that we, as a community, have more dirt roads than any other city in our area of this population. And what is currently Ward 1, what makes us also different from the other wards, is that we have more dirt roads than any of them. So there's a great urban renewal project. But anyway, that's another topic for another day. And the city councilors I have talked to know how I feel about this, the streets and development out in West Laramie. I'm glad we've had extra development in the last decade. I would like to see that continue. I would also like to see that continue all across town, north, south, east, west. It shouldn't, you know, we're all in this together. We shouldn't be fighting each other. We should be working to make this better. I like this proposal better than 1B because it gives the smaller percentage of population on the west side of the tracks, hopefully an opportunity to have some better representation. I'm not envious of the task you have at hand tonight. You have many divergent opinions and many things to think about. I wish you all luck, and I am grateful that we have you sitting on the council, and I appreciate your service. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Halbsgett. Appreciate your comments. Got another comment, and I have a screen name Brandon, and if you could just give your full name to the council before you begin your comment, you have the floor.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council. My name is Brandon Newman, so sorry that my last name wasn't on there. I happen to live on the west side of Laramie, and I've been throwing around the idea to actually run for city council. So I've been talking to a lot of people who live on the west side, and you know, I think it was Councilman Schuster that said that, you know, the streets that they paved over here. I live off of one of those paved streets. I live on a dirt road. And so, you know, the infrastructure over here needs to be a little bit better. But with that being said, you know, splitting neighborhoods, kind of like some of the other council members have said, isn't actually a bad idea. If I had, you know, more representation of people going to council meetings for, you know, the west side, maybe we could get a little bit more done. I think looking at any map that I've looked at, because I've been following this since day one, and trust me, I don't want to be in any of your guys' shoes right now. But we're going to split neighborhoods up no matter what. And so I think we just need to look at as Laramie as a big whole, instead of trying to, you know, worry about splitting neighborhoods up in that kind of aspect. So I would personally like to see 1H discussed and 1G discussed a little bit more. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you for your comments. For the time being, that appears to wrap up public comment. So let's go back to the council for any further discussion before we go to a vote on the amendment, if there is any. It's been good discussion. Yes, Councilmember O'Doherty.
I just want to remind people that the letter we got from Mike Massey about why the wards were created in the first place, and that if we go with one of the derivatives of map 1B, that we're essentially going back to pretty much at large, the way that splits that up. And that's not my assessment, that's from other professionals in the business. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember O'Doherty. Other comments? I think we're prepared to take a vote on the amendment. So, City Clerk, if we could have a roll call.
Humby,
No.
Gabriel,
Let's come back to him.
Harrington,
Yes.
O'Doherty,
Yes.
Schmeckel,
No.
Schuster,
No.
Somerville,
No.
Pierce,
No.
Gabriel,
Yes.
Weaver.
Yes,
That's 4 yeses and 5 noes, Your Honor.
that motion fails. So that brings us back to the main motion. And we're considering map 1B at this time. I'm going to recognize Councilmember Somerville.
Thank you, Mayor. I wonder if the council would allow me to explain both the 1G and 1H, and then I'd be prepared to make an amendment after that, if that would be acceptable.
I think so, Councilmember Somerville. Just do them in alphabetical order and kind of one at a time, right? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
City Clerk, could you put up 1G, please? Okay, thank you. I wonder if we could zoom in just a little bit. Perfect. Thank you, City Clerk. So 1G is essentially the 1B map with two changes to it, essentially. The first change that I want to talk about, I draw your attention to the block marked 13-2. That's Grand Avenue runs through the middle of it between 15th and 22nd Street. So the original 1B map just had that northern section north of Grand. And after meeting with the county clerk and city clerk and hearing the discussion that we've had, they were concerned about potentially orphaning fraternity and sorority row in that area after the dorms move west of 15th Street. So the change that I made to the map was to include the 4 blocks south of Grand Avenue. So it goes down to Sheridan Street there, as you can see, as a little cutout to provide a sufficient voter base for a precinct to alleviate that concern from the city and the county clerks. The second change that I made was in response to a constituent call, and that would be over near downtown, right around the area of Grand and 3rd Street. I'll call it the back of the pickup window used to actually come out a couple of blocks there. And so the core of downtown was all in Ward 1. And the constituent asked that we consider moving that to create some downtown space, both in Ward 2 and in Ward 1. Now, to make that work with population, I also dropped, if you'll go to follow the red line on 15th Street, all the way to the north there, yep, kind of right, a little bit farther north, Nancy. Yep, up in that area. So just north of that block used to be where it's blue now for a couple of blocks above the red line that goes horizontal there. That used to be in Ward 2, and I dropped that down to Ward 3 to even out the population. So I think that this map, it is 1B with just a little bit of cleanup and one constituent suggestion on moving the downtown line. So I guess I would stop there, Mayor, and ask if there's any questions on that map.
Okay. And Councilmember Somerville, are you going to explain both maps and then introduce one, or do you want to do one at a time as amendments? I guess I'm a little unclear there.
Mayor, I think we would do them one at a time as amendments, and however you'd like to do it. We can have some discussion before we put one of them on the floor, or however you'd like to do it.
Yeah, I think maybe just to kind of keep this in order, we'll do them one at a time.
Mayor, I'd just like to explain both of them because they're drastically different maps.
All right, then. So we'll have an explanation, I suppose, and then maybe depending on the feedback we get, that'll help inform your choice as to what you want to move as an amendment. Councilmember Schuster, thanks for waiting. You're up.
Thank you. I don't mean to throw a monkey wrench into this, but I've talked to some people, and the university, realizing that there's a huge housing shortage and apartment shortage in this town, is now in discussion about keeping some of the other dorms alive for several years, because even the city, I talked to some people there, we designed our sewer system we just put in to basically demolish 2 dorms when the new dorm is built. And that's been a lot of this discussion. And now they are talking about keeping basically a good chunk of the dorms, and hopefully they can attract both freshmen, which they have a problem of putting in their dorms currently, and some of the sophomores too, because their new complex will be very nice. It'll be little 4-plex apartments with a central area. So right now, we may be adding a heck of a chunk of population into Ward 2 if they try to keep the remaining dorms open still. So might be a fun one to think about too. I'm not trying to throw a monkey wrench in there. I just know that a monkey wrench might be thrown in there because nothing's in stone yet, but they're sure talking about it. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Floor is open to ask Councilmember Somerville some questions or to share your views. Or we can allow Councilmember Somerville to talk about the other map. Councilmember Somerville.
Mayor, I think if there's no other questions, I'll move on to that map. If the city clerk could change it to the H map, please. Thank you. Perfect. Thank you, city clerk. So this map is what I'm calling the compromise map. I tried to address everybody's concerns and all the feedback that we got into a map. So the first one I'll talk about is the stuff west of the tracks. So given the feedback that I shared with you guys earlier, right? One West Side resident wanted me to keep it whole. Somebody said, if you're going to split them both. And trying to look at that holistically while still trying to get to the goal of better policy making and more knowledgeable council members. You'll see on the west side, so I've kept what I'm deeming Old Town West Laramie. So these are the streets, these are the houses that were annexed in the small block areas there, north and south of Snowy Range. And then the west side. So you'll notice that the line for Ward 1 on the northern boundary follows the Snowy Range Road and over the new viaduct. So Old Town West Laramie and the west side are intact in Ward 1. On west of the tracks in Ward 2, the northern section of that got cut off or divided to go to Ward 2 is new subdivision development on North Pierce Street, some what I always call random rural type residences that are off of Pierce Street. There's not a whole lot of them, but there are a few. And then there's a couple, I believe 2 trailer courts that would be the major houses that would be west of the tracks. So there's definitely what I saw was a difference in infrastructure construction. Again, try to use that term Old West Laramie to differentiate. So that's why I cut that line there. As you can see, the new Ward 2 goes all the way over to 30th Street and really catches all the northern boundary. It includes West Laramie, some tree area, and then some subdivision development. Ward 1's pretty self-explanatory. You can see all of that is included. That right now, I believe all of that is already included in Ward 1, except for a few blocks down on the southeastern side. And then Ward 3 is a little bit of new territory in that they would have the university housing. So to balance the population, it was necessary to basically give them UW new dorms and old dorms, et cetera, to balance that population. When I was constructing the map, it dawned on me that doing it that way means we've really put some student population in all 3 wards. So is the student, maybe that will, again, help that balance, and again, maybe lead to some good policy making, because everybody is dealing with the same constituency in one sense in that area. In general, the map overall, I tried to balance land mass as much as I could, and I will be the first one to admit when I'm doing that, I chop off the airport, because that airport section is just so ridiculously huge, and there's almost nobody that lives out there. So geographically, in terms of land mass, these are pretty balanced. I think that the way these are constructed, it cuts across all of the issues, right? You've got 2 wards that go west of the tracks now. You've got all 3 wards that technically cross 15th Street, although Ward 1 only crosses it a little bit. And I think that will give us a better issue balance. So we didn't orphan any precincts. We got the west side included in one ward and still managed to balance everything out. So that's the map. Like I said, I'm calling it the compromise map. I think it does give us some good growth areas in the discussion that we were having in terms of balancing growth potential. I also think with a map like this, we might be able to make smaller tweaks in the future. And whether we're talking about G or H, I will just say, to me personally, setting that map up the best we can, so that maybe in 10 years it's small tweaks instead of throwing it all out, I think is a good goal. It might be lofty, but it's a good goal, and it's something that we should consider. So, Mr. Mayor, I would stand for any questions on this map.
Questions on this map or comments? We'll do both. Councilmember Schuster.
I'll just make a comment. It's not going to affect me one way or another, but I talked to Councilor Somerville today on this while I was on the road driving. It was kind of fun because it got a little staticky a couple times, but there are currently 4 council members in that ward. 5, I guess. Aaron's showing me a big 5 signal, so there's 5 councilor members on there. So it is going to shake up the council's makeup, and I have no problem with that. This is the one I want to support. Yeah, it's going to shake up the council, because there'll be probably at least 3 new councilors on there. And I don't want to say the word great. I mean, I want to see turnover. I want to see fresh ideas and things like that. So I have no problem with that. This is my choice right here. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember O'Doherty.
I just want to point out that 3 of the councilors would be on council for 2 more years, and most of the area voting for them, I mean, the people that voted for them are not in that, a lot of the people that voted for them are not in that area. So it would take 2 years before anyone could be elected to Ward 2. We have 4 councilors in Ward 1. And again, in that case, it's 2 councilors coming up. So there'd be 2 councilors there and 1 election, and then 3 people on Ward 3.
Thank you, Councilmember O'Doherty. Any other comments or questions here?
All right. Mayor, if I can.
Yep.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate Councilor Schuster and Councilor Doherty bringing that up, because that is absolutely true with this map. But it did dawn on me as I was looking at it over the weekend and trying to figure out how to make this work. The fact that we don't have any council members, I don't think we have any council members right now that live in Ward 3. But that's a huge swath of area. And I don't know how that happened over the years. You know, I think we've had some council members in the past on council that have lived in some of those areas, but I don't think we currently have anybody in that area. But there is a process to deal with that. And that's something that we have to deal with when we shift with redistricting every 10 years anyways. So thank you, Mayor.
Okay. Councilmember Schuster.
Thank you very much. Of all the funny things, this happened when we went from the larger 6 counselors with 3 at large. This same thing happened. It just dawned on me. This very same thing happened, that on one election, not all of the counselors could be reelected back to the council. And the ones I talked to on that said it was just the way it happened, and it was too bad it happened, but it did. And later on, some of them got back and some of them didn't, but they just decided not to run again. But what it is what it is, and I think it'd be great to see some more people on here. Thank you.
Thank you. Other discussion? Councilmember Somerville, do you have a motion?
Mayor, in terms of what I've heard, I've had one council member say they support 1H, so I guess I'll put that one forward first. Mr. Mayor, I would move to amend the ordinance by substitution for map H.
Second.
Second.
So motion and a second from Councilmember Schuster by a fingernail there, I think, Vice Mayor. All right. Any further discussion on this? Let's see if there's public comment on this. Seeing none. Council. Okay, we have public comment now. Let's recognize Mr. Klaus Halbsgett. Mr. Halbsgett, when you're ready to go, you have the floor.
Been a very interesting meeting. I again don't envy the choice that you guys have to make. I still disagree with dividing West Side and West Laramie. We're a distinct community, as all communities are. I think North, South, East, and West have very distinct communities. It'd be great if we could have a 4-ward system with 2 councilors and 1 at large. But I realize I am late to the meeting on this particular topic. I don't like this version that you're doing. I would personally vote against it if I was there with you. I'm not, unfortunately, so I can't. But think carefully about dividing our communities. I hope this doesn't pass. I'm afraid it probably will on this amendment. I just wanted to throw my 2 cents worth in, and I hope you guys are having fun tonight. I look forward to see how you vote. Appreciate your time. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Halbsgett. I'd like to recognize Susan Simpson. Mrs. Susan Simpson, you have the floor whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mayor. I see that the House districts are red lines, but I'm having a hard time identifying them on the map. Are the wards congruent with the House districts?
Councilmember Somerville, that's a question for you.
Thank you, Mayor. The answer to that is in some places, yes, and in some places, no. So the western, or the border between Ward 1, the western boundary for the legislative district that's west of the West Side, that cuts through Wards 1 and Wards 2. I did align it on 15th Street as much as possible. I believe that we'll end up with 9 precincts, which is what we have for map 1B.
Thank you.
Thank you. Floor is open for further comments from attendees. Seeing none, back to the council for further discussion on this. Vice Mayor Pierce or Councilmember Harrington? Who was up first? I was looking at the map again.
Vice Mayor can go first, Mr. Mayor.
All right, Vice Mayor Pierce, sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Councilor Harrington, but I'm pretty sure you were first, so
Right,
go ahead.
Harrington. Go ahead, Councilmember Harrington.
Well, thanks, Vice Mayor. I am curious about the what would be 13-1 in this map. and I'm curious because it feels like an awfully large or an awfully small geographically, an awfully small precinct. But I was wondering if the county clerk and her team had weighed in on that precinct, only because it seems like it could run potentially afoul of that 200 voter threshold that we're really trying for per precinct.
Hello, thank you. We did run those numbers.
Okay, Vice Mayor Pierce.
Mayor, you were getting a response from
Vice Mayor Pierce, I think you're muted for us.
I'm not showing I'm muted.
I hear you.
You were getting
I think the mayor's
Sorry,
video
folks,
is lagging.
I'm at a loss here. I'm not hearing anyone. And I thought Vice Mayor Pierce was seeking the floor after Councilmember Harrington.
Right. So, Mayor, can you hear me now? Can the rest of council hear me?
I can hear you just fine.
The county clerk wanted to weigh in on that.
Right. Yeah, so, Mayor Weaver, there's something going on with your audio because
it's working now. I've got it.
Okay, point is the county clerk's office wanted to jump in the discussion related to the H map, as I recall things.
Thank you very much, and I'm sorry about that audio problem. County clerk's office.
So, hello, thank you.
Yes.
We did run those numbers for both 45.3 and 13.1, and both of them are a substantial enough voter base for us to not have any concerns.
Thank you for addressing that question. Vice Mayor Pierce, I think you still have the floor if you need it.
Yeah, I just want to tell folks I really support this. I like the idea of change, and I think it's good. You're going to get a yes vote from me on this one, and if it doesn't make it, you'll get a yes vote from me on G. So, but as long as this one's on the floor first, let's just go for it.
All right. Other questions and discussion? Should there be any? You folks will allow my 2 bits. I think between the 2 maps that were presented by Councilmember Somerville, I prefer the previous map, but I recognize that all of the maps that we've looked at least in my opinion, have merits and also present problems. And I think that's going to be the case with any map that we look at, that we see proposed and that we take a vote on. I really do. And I think some of that, again, is a feature of this being the first go-around with redistricting the city ward boundaries in the current system. I think Councilmember Schuster brought up some interesting points about the transition from the old micro districts that also included 2 members at large at the time, I think, and the at-large members were then placed into districts that they either had to choose to run in or not. In the 2012 election, I believe it was, 10 years ago. And I also recognize that whichever one of these maps we choose, we're looking at, I think, 5 elections within them. And by the time we get to the end of that 10-year period, despite our best efforts, it's probably unlikely that they're going to be balanced perfectly by the time we get to the end of the decade or the beginning of the next one. So there's some built-in problems that we have to deal with just to the best of our ability. I do think I prefer the map that was discussed before this map. Yeah, Councilmember Harrington, right ahead.
Thanks, Mayor. I am just curious. So I started this process without like a lot of real strong opinions one way or another. And they've developed sort of over time. as we've worked through this. I'll chalk some of that up to my own ignorance and the learning curve associated. But one of the things that I've been trying to keep close in my decision making is, I guess, the two pieces are to keep the communities of interest whole, and I can appreciate that largely this does that, certainly by comparison to the other. But the other thing I am keeping in mind is how hard it is to explain this to a member of the public, while we are all deep into this and know all the details of where our wards end and things like that. Many members of the public, certainly you all have had the conversation at the grocery store, where you're really trying hard to explain the boundary of a ward, but you really end up just asking, like, what's your address, and then telling them whether they're in your ward or not. I am a little concerned that this map makes that harder with making something like Clark Street a boundary between Ward 1 and Ward 2, but only for 4 blocks or something like that. Trying to explain how, like, why we drew the lines where we did, I think would be kind of a challenge. And then, including that, Ward 3 has this bump out that crosses Grand Avenue to Garfield, but only for a little ways, and then you're back. I don't know. This feels really complicated to explain to the public, where they live, in what ward they live, and then, sort of who they should be looking at for candidates for a council race. So I'm not, Mayor, I feel like I'm somebody showing up to the party just saying I don't like all the maps, but not offering a real solution, and I apologize for that, but I'm not a fan of this map.
Thank you, Councilmember Harrington. Although I'm sure people that put a lot of time in designing maps appreciate your apology. That's not why you're here. Your opinion is equal to the rest of ours. Other discussion about this. It's been a pretty good, long process. Lots of discussion about these maps, a lot of effort put in. I don't think anybody could fault us for not paying substantial attention. So one more public comment on this motion. Is there any objection to hearing it, council members? All right, let's recognize Mr. Brett Glass. Let Mr. Glass into the meeting, and you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor Weaver, members of council. I am in agreement with the mayor and also with Councilor Harrington about this map. This is not the one I prefer given the choice between G and H for the following reasons. First of all, it is confusing. It has an awkward bulb out to encompass the dorms in Ward 3, and that's going to cause some confusion. It does not give downtown representation in 2 wards, which I thought was an advantage of G. And also, one of the biggest things is that we're having an election coming up this year and another in 2 years. We will lose a tremendous amount of experience if council members have to retire because there are too many from Ward 1. So for that reason, I prefer 1G to 1H. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Glass. Any other comments? Well, we've got it open for public comment. Last chance. Yes, let's recognize Brandon. And I've, of course, forgot your last name already, and I apologize for that, but you have the floor.
Brandon Newman.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry I didn't put it in there. I'm going to next time, I promise.
That's all right.
I would tend to agree with the last person who just talked. 1G, it keeps more council members on the council, and the problem with the turnover, you could say, would be that experience. And I've seen in other races that, you get a huge turnover and now you have a whole bunch of new people coming in. Sometimes that's not good for the communities because they all have their different opinions, and maybe they don't understand kind of how their wards work and that kind of thing. So out of the 2 maps, I would ask the council to look at 1G. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate you're sticking around to share your views with us, Mr. Newman. All right. Any other comments about this map we're preparing to vote on here? All right, council. Give you another shot at it, if you'd like. City Clerk, I think we're ready to vote, so let's have a roll call vote on the amendment.
Humby.
No.
Gabriel.
No.
Harrington.
No.
O'Doherty.
No.
Schmeckel.
No.
Schuster. Somerville.
Yes.
Pierce.
Yes.
Weaver.
Yes.
That's 4 yeses and 5 noes, Your Honor.
That motion fails. So that takes us back to the map unamended, which is currently 1B. And council members, for the sake of process, I do believe Councilmember Somerville has another amendment to bring. Although Councilmember Somerville, I think in the interest of fairness, we should check and see it. Does any other council member have an amendment, so we're not just exclusively considering Councilmember Somerville's amendments one after the other? Nobody's constructed a map in the last 10 minutes or so that I'd like to introduce here at the midnight hour. Are you sure? Oh, all right. I thought I'd better check. Councilmember Somerville.
Thank you, Mayor. At this time, I would move to amend the ordinance by substitution, by substituting map 1G.
Second.
Good, great, something.
There's been a motion and a second from the Vice Mayor, and excuse us for trying to find some humor in this process, everybody. It's difficult, and sometimes that's the best way to get through it. We've had some pretty good discussion, I think, about merits of maps now, and I don't know that we need to have a further extended discussion about this. I might check with public comment, folks, to get us started, and then if there's anything else you want to add before we go to the vote, we'll do that. Is there any additional public comment which hasn't addressed anything about this motion so far? Seeing none. Seeing none. Can we have the map displayed, City Clerk? Councilmember Schuster, I see that you have raised your hand.
Thank you very much. I know it's late and people are talking and we're kind of going back and forth and stuff like that. I just want people to remember, if we defeat this one and can't decide on a new map tonight, it reverts back to, I believe it's 1B, is it? Yeah, I'm trying to get all my letters and numbers and acronyms and everything right. So I just want people to remember that there is I don't want to call it the word fallback, but yeah, there's a map it would revert to if we do not approve this. Thank you.
Thank you for pointing that out. Councilmember Somerville, can we have you highlight the differences between this map proposed by this amendment? Oh, I'm sorry. I've got Councilmember O'Doherty, and then I'll go to you with that question next. Councilmember O'Doherty.
I would encourage people to vote for this amendment because it takes care of the problem of orphaning some voters in what is described here as 13-2. Without that extra population to the south of the dorm, we could lose voter privacy. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember O'Doherty. And I think Councilmember O'Doherty partially addressed what I was going to ask Councilmember Somerville, but that would just be to highlight the major differences between this map and map 1B.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Essentially, what Councilor O'Doherty said, the change to include the 4 blocks south of Grand between 15th and 22nd, so we don't have an orphan precinct potentially. And then the change to alter the line slightly in Ward 2 to divide downtown between Ward 1 and Ward 2, with a little bit of population given to Ward 3 at the north end of Ward 2 to account for that population shift.
Thank you, Councilmember Somerville. Councilmember Somerville, another question to you from me is, how many holdover, in other words, council members in a given district does this map create? Do we have any 4 or 5 member districts in this map?
Mr. Mayor, we do. So there'll be 2 council members that currently live in Ward 2. There will be, I believe, 3 council members in Ward 3. And then there are 4 council members in Ward 1. If I have that math correct, somebody correct me if I'm wrong.
Looks like everybody thinks your counts are right. Councilmember O'Doherty, I saw your hand pop up. Go ahead.
I would say that the people remaining, though, are the ones that are there for 2 years. So it doesn't have to affect your voting too much.
Thank you. City Clerk, I have one last question that I'd like to direct towards you, and that is, does the ward system right now require wards to be labeled as 1, 2, 3 numerically? That might be a question for you and possibly the city attorney, and here's what I'm getting at. Do they have to be described as Ward 1, 2, and 3, or could they be described as north, south, and east? Or does the ordinance require Ward 1, Ward 2, Ward 3? Thinking about voters being able to orient themselves.
Mayor, that's a great question. If the city attorney knows this before I do, you're welcome to jump in here. I was just going to look back to our municipal code and see if there's anything in there. I think the reasoning behind it previously was because we were divided into 3 wards. So that's just the way that previous councils made that distinction, was to create Ward 1, Ward 2, and Ward 3.
Thank you, City Clerk. And while you're looking at that for a moment, I hope that council kind of tracks with my question here a little bit. I don't know what the determination of that should be, but it's a question I have in terms of folks being able to perhaps more easily follow where they may be getting away from the old number system with a new map, still retaining the structure, of course, 3 wards with 3 members each, but maybe a different system of labeling the wards may or may not be helpful. I don't know. We'll see. Perhaps we're required to do 1, 2, and 3. I don't know. Or maybe nobody agrees with my concern here. Certainly prepared to accept that also. City Attorney, thank you.
Mayor, I don't know. I'll have to look. You can address that next week.
Yeah, and I don't know that we need an answer to that tonight. And again, I don't even know if the rest of the council even thinks it's important. Appreciate the answer, City Attorney. Councilmember O'Doherty.
I like the idea of labeling them with the north, south, and east, so that I would maybe we amend that if that's allowable by our, well, I don't know. I guess we can take care of it next week. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate your chiming in, Councilmember O'Doherty, but I think that's where we're at. I think we have to wait and see, and then City Attorney will let us know, and we can determine if that's a choice we want to make. I don't see a lot of major concerns across the council here about that question. It's certainly not unheard of. I know in some municipalities they have, wards defined by area or direction, if you will. Any other questions about this? Or comments, of course. Council members, this has been, I think it's fair to say, a challenging process. And people have put a lot of time and effort into it. And I don't think there was an outcome where everybody, all 9 council members and all of our constituents were going to say, I'm totally and completely satisfied with the way things played out. I regret that. But I acknowledge that it probably is unrealistic to have thought that would be the case. And I also acknowledge that there will be remaining concerns about any map in any constituency grouped within that map. And I wish that there was a system in place that could address all of those concerns, but I believe it's an imperfect process that will always produce imperfect results, and we simply have to do the best we can and come to what the group consensus is on the council, like so many other decisions that we make. City Clerk, I'm going to go to you now so that you can conduct a roll call vote for us on the amendment.
Humby,
Yes.
Gabriel,
Yes.
Harrington,
Yes.
O'Doherty,
Yes.
Schmeckel,
Yes.
Schuster,
Yes.
Somerville,
Yes.
Pierce,
Yes.
Weaver.
Yes.
That's 9 yeses and 0 noes, Your Honor.
That motion carries, and the amendment has passed. So that brings us now to the motion in the main as it's been amended. And of course, just to follow the format, we'll see if there's any additional comments from the council members or the public. Council members, anything else you'd like to add to this? Councilmember Somerville.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a comment. I think the public has seen us over the last couple of meetings work really hard on this map. And if you had asked me before tonight where I thought we'd end up, I thought we'd end up with H, which was the compromise map that I wasn't always quite as thrilled with, rather than where we are now. So it's a difficult process, and I know everybody has worked really hard on it. And I just want to echo that for the council members and the public.
Thank you, Councilmember Somerville. City Clerk.
Mayor, I was just going to request that the council postpone the third reading until April 5th to allow staff to draft the legal language associated with the ordinance.
So the motion really, in order, is to postpone rather. And so we'll need to amend the main motion to postpone to the date that the city clerk mentioned, if I understand you correctly, City Clerk.
Mayor, that is our request. Just to make it very clear, City Attorney raised his hand. I'll let him.
Yeah, you don't have, well, you know what? It's 9 o'clock. Do it as you wish. I thought someone could just make a motion to postpone.
Yeah, I think you're right. I don't think we have to amend the main motion. We can have a motion to postpone. But I also know we had a couple other people that wanted to make a comment. Thank you, City Attorney, and for your efforts to be here with us tonight. Councilmember Harrington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Since we're aimed at a postponement, before we're on to that motion, I will likely miss the April 5th meeting, which is okay. I'm not sure my vote is important in the on whether or not this makes its way through. I just wanted to say that I continue to have serious reservations about this map that divides West Laramie and the West Side. And I just wanted to leave that for the record, but I will likely miss the meeting. So I hope you all take that now. And thanks, Mayor.
Councilmember Harrington, I appreciate that. In my view, every vote from every council member is important every time. Vice Mayor Pierce.
So I'm a little confused. So if we move to postpone, we're postponing to vote on April 5th. Once on the third reading for the final legal description, we can't do a follow-up for the legal description on the 5th?
I think that's right. City Attorney? I'm sorry, City Clerk.
I'm just not sure what's being asked. What I understand the situation is now you have amended this on third reading with the new map. That new map has to be put into words. We will bring you the ordinance with the words in them that reflect the new map on April the 5th. And that will be your vote on third reading.
Okay, got it. Thank
City
you.
Clerk. Thank you. Sorry, Vice Mayor. City Clerk, I'm sorry for cutting you off earlier. Did you have anything in addition you wanted to add to that?
No, thank you, Mayor. Thanks.
All right, I apologize. I know that was along the lines of what you're going to share with us as well, is that it needed to be put into language so that the third reading was passing the map that we've amended it towards. Council, can I go to the public? I'd like to recognize Susan Simpson. Mrs. Susan Simpson, please, you have the floor whenever you're ready.
That was a mistaken hand raise, but I'll say thank you very much for your plugging away consistently. People don't realize how hard you all work.
That's very kind of you. Thank you very much. City Attorney, I see you still got your hand up, but that might be a holdover.
Let me fix that.
Just wanted to make sure. Just wanted to make sure.
Mayor,
All right.
point of order, I think we have one more member of the public.
I think you're right. Mr. Newman. Oh, and the hands keep going up, which is totally fine and appropriate. Mr. Newman, you're up first.
I would just like to thank you guys for all your guys' hard work. I know this is not an easy task for you guys. I also would like to say that this puts me in Ward 2, which I'm pretty happy about. So thank you for this, and thank you for all your guys' hard work.
Thank you, Mr. Newman. From the sounds of it, there may be a possibility that you'll get a taste of it yourself in the near future. Mr. Haldsgate, please, you've got the floor.
I'm sure you're getting tired from hearing from me at this point in the evening. So thank you one last time for listening to me. I would like to say Carol Simpson, when she made her first comments this evening, was correct. West Laramie and the west side is going to have some problems with either this map you have now or the 1B. There'll be a lot of resentment on the west side in West Laramie. So it'll take 10 years. We'll vote. Population will change. We'll redistrict then. I probably won't be around for that. But I would like to thank Carol, Mike Massey for what they said. I would like to advise all of you city councilors to read Mike's letter. I'm sure you have. Read it again. Would like you to read Jackie Gonzalez's letter to you once again, the county clerk. She was very pointed in what she had to say. I believe what you're doing now, whether you approve this proposition or 1B, you're making a mistake. The consequences will come in the years following. But I appreciate the difficult position that you are in. I hope you can make a great decision. And I just want to thank you again for letting me ramble on. I appreciate it. Have a good night. I don't envy your position once again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Haldsgate. And I think that the council is interested in your opinion, so no worries about fatiguing here. Council members, the original motion was made by Councilmember O'Doherty, so I'm going to give her the job for the suggested motion. Councilmember O'Doherty, are you ready?
I move to postpone until this reading until April 5th.
Second from Councilmember Schuster. There's been a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the motion to postpone? I think we've heard the reasons. All right. City Clerk, can we have a roll call vote?
Humby.
Yes.
Gabriel.
Yes.
Harrington.
Yes.
O'Doherty.
Yes.
Schmeckel.
Yes.
Schuster.
Yes.
Somerville.
Yes.
Pierce.
Yes.
Weaver.
Yes.
That's 9 yeses and 0 noes, Your Honor.
Thank you, City Clerk. That motion carries, and the item has been postponed to the April 5th meeting. Council, was there any input on the agenda? wanted to get to this item for reasons that I think are probably plain to all of you at this point, but I also want to give you a chance for any input on the agenda. Councilmember Schuster.
Councilmember Somerville's hand's up, and she's had her hand up, so I'm going to let her go first.
Thank you, Councilmember Schuster. Councilmember Somerville.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick question. It's a long agenda. I know the consent agenda is already really long, but I was wondering if there was any of those additional items, considering the number of planning items that we could put on the consent agenda. I don't know if any of the wastewater treatment plant stuff is overly expensive or what that looked like, but that was my only question, is if there's anything else we could condense, maybe throw the community partners on the consent agenda.
Mayor.
City Clerk.
The community partner item is $210,000, so it does exceed our $100,000 limit. So unfortunately, the items that we have on regular are either there by statute, like the liquor license. Unfortunately, we can't put that on consent since it's the first time they've had a license. And the rest of the items exceeded our dollar limit.
Thank you, City Clerk. Yep, Councilmember Somerville.
City Clerk, can you remind me, did we put that 100,000 in the City Council rules, or is that just still a traditional limit? We put it in the rules, right? Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Somerville. Some council members questioned the wisdom of that decision, perhaps for instances just such as this. Vice Mayor, I know you took a look at this agenda, and when you and I spoke about it, you talked a little bit about trying to arrange this, and I think you and the staff pretty much landed on the agenda we see before us. It is what it needs to be, but I'll give you an opportunity for any other comment.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. That's fine. I mean, I'm certainly open to suggestions, or we're open to suggestions on this, but I kind of think it is what it is, right? So we're just going to have to be swift. And if anybody can find anything to put on the consent, I'm sure we're open to it. So.
And I suppose that there's always the opportunity to do that at the meeting. Councilmember Schuster, thanks for waiting.
You bet. I really think that most of the items are just going to fly through. Hopefully it'll be just announcing it, not much comment, and away we go. I had a question on 9T on the consent agenda that it was a bid, and I was just curious what ward, what utilities. It just says a bid was accepted, so it must be a smaller bid because it didn't go over the amount, or maybe it's an amendment. But I was just curious on where and what utilities. Hopefully I don't want to bring it on the agenda. I hope you can just tell me what it is. 9T.
The city clerk can probably help you with that, or the vice mayor, whoever's ready. 9G on the consent agenda is council.
T. T is in Tom.
D is in dog on the consent agenda. Thank you.
Okay, just T is in Tom.
Yes.
D is in dog. Oh, T is in Tom?
T.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Can't hear. T, yes.
Nope.
T.
Okay, let me just pull up that item really quick here and see if I can get a couple of details.
You can go to public comment if you want to, or we need to adjourn the meeting too. Might want us to do that and go back to the work session.
Yeah, I'll give the city clerk a minute. Okay. And I think most of our attendees at this point have left us. and council, that's exactly why I wanted to do it this way, is to let those folks, not have to be here till the very bitter end with us. I don't see any further public comment. I do have one, and yeah, it's Judy Snoke. You have the floor.
I'm just laughing at you.
Okay.
And I hope you all can see some bizarre humor in all of this. I agree with some of the previous people who appreciate your very hard work on all of this. Thank you, thank you, thank you, and good night. Thank
you very much, Judy. We appreciate your joining us for so many meetings.
Oh, it's, yeah.
Thank you so much. And I suppose, Council, it's probably worth saying we do like to get that feedback that people appreciate the work we're doing. Of course, we also acknowledge that not everyone is pleased with the outcomes of the work we do. We're not fools.
Mayor, was Councilor Schuster's question where that easement is located? Did I understand that correctly?
Is it a street? Is it an alley? Is it water, sewer? Just curious.
It says it's a water line required for fire protection.
Okay.
Is designed and planned to be installed the north side of MOC North Campus.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now I know exactly where it's at. It's going to North Campus. So they ran that water line out there, and now they need to put in a fire hydrant. I've had to deal with that when we had our business here in town, install a fire hydrant. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I did want to give people an opportunity to talk about the consent and regular agenda. Seeing no further input about that, I'll check with you one more time. I think we're settled. And then Vice Mayor, to your point earlier, if there are adjustments, we can talk about those in the pre-meeting also next week on Tuesday. But for now, I think we will close up comments on the agenda, and that takes us to the end of the special meeting, and I'd call on Councilmember Schuster.
Thank you. I would like to adjourn the city council meeting so we can all tend to our lives.
Thank you. A second from the Vice Mayor. All those in favor, raise your hand or say aye.
Aye.
Aye, that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Have a good evening. Staff, thanks for hanging in there with us, and everyone else. Good night.